Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dauphin.
Our guest today hails from Topanga, California. He is a Masterson Method Certified Practitioner. His business is Performance Equine Bodywork. He is also a Legacy Equine Nutrition Advisor and sales rep and distributor. He is a volunteer with the Equine Empowerment Training, working with veterans and Mustangs. Mr. Will Friday, how are you doing this morning?
Doing really well, Daniel. It's great to be here.
Well, we met at the Masterson Method gathering in Phoenix earlier this year. I think that was in January, and we had some side conversations and thought having you on the podcast as a guest would be an enlightening thing. You have been in the horse business a long time and seen some stuff, and so hopefully we have a good chat this morning.
Well, I think actually I'm a really good definition of that adult onset horsemanship, because I'm one of those guys who rode a little bit, around when we were kids, and then went a different direction for most of my adult life. And then when my daughter started riding, I got back into it too. And so I think I do define adult onset horsemanship pretty well.
That's been a gem of a name. One of my followers on social media had brought that out one time, and I said, I'm totally stealing that phrase from you there. So, all right. Well, we start everybody off with the lightning round question, and these are for points, so be on your A game.
I'm ready.
If you were a Jedi, what % chance is there that you would misuse the Force?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I color outside the lines all the time.
How easy would it be working with horses? You're in the round pen, he's 30 feet away, and I can touch him anyway. He can run. There'd be nothing left to it, right? Morning or evening?
Oh, I'm a night owl. Mornings are painful. So I get most of my work done after 9 o'clock at night and stay up too late. So yeah, I'm a night owl.
Do you have much dealings regularly with the rest of the country? Because you're in California on Pacific Coast time. So if you're a night owl, that's really, really late for the rest of us. Does that ever interfere with things, or not so much?
Not so much. No, a lot of what we're doing is on site and in person. So yeah.
How long is appropriate time to dunk a cookie in milk?
Well, of course, it's cookie dependent, but I would say you need to be in there until the bubbles stop.
Okay, so you're like a little soggy cookie. Fill all the crevices. Yeah. I'm right with you there.
I'm not worried if there's a little pile of cookie on the bottom of the glass of milk at the end. So
right there with you. Absolutely. I like my cereal soggy too. What is your favorite way to treat aches and pains?
Probably just ignoring them. Just waiting, let time take its toll and deal with it. It's like the saying when a horseman goes to the doctor and the doctor says, describe your level of pain. And the horseman says, the usual amount. And the doctor says, well, the usual amount is 0. So no, it's, I think the BioFreeze and Traumeal has gotten a lot of traction in our household. And I do have a great acupuncturist and massage therapist in my town that my wife is always saying, you need to go see them. So, but I think the basic way I get rid of pain the most is just keep working.
Interesting little tidbit. My dad is a business consultant and the originator of BioFreeze is here in Lafayette, Louisiana, and she was one of his customers. He actually brokered the sale of the company for her, and that's going to tie back in with our sponsor for this episode, because she was a pioneer in delivering vitamins through osmosis, through skin contact and absorption through skin and all of that stuff. So a small world. Yep. Sometimes. What skill or technique do you not have with a horse that you admire in someone else and wish that you did have?
Well, I know I often say, given where I work, the biggest gap in my education and training is I cannot speak a lick of Spanish, and I'm surrounded by a lot of incredible horse people that fluent, conversant in Spanish, and I have no idea what they're talking about. So even though that's not necessarily a horse skill, I think it is a hole in my training. But I think what I'm missing the most right now is just enough time to really settle in and be consistent with a horse so I can find out what I'm really not understanding and not learning. I'm working more than I'm riding these days, so time in the saddle is what I'm missing the most.
I'll actually say with the Spanish that you mentioned there in high school, I wanted to take French, but was forced to take Spanish because not enough people wanted to take French. And so I copped an attitude about it the whole time. And then fast forward a few years into the horse business, and I'm generally the liaison between the help and the head guy, and the ability to speak Spanish was a big part of my horse journey. I lived with the guys in the bunkhouse for the most part, and I actually went back 10 years after high school, found my teacher at her house in the summer and apologized to her for the attitude that I know I had copped, because in fact, the subject I didn't want to take wound up being one of the most important high school subjects I ever took. So
Right. Yep.
You never know. You never know.
Yep.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how well can you back a trailer?
I'm going to be conservative and give myself a 6. It's I'm not doing that enough either, but I drove other trailers for other purposes and struggled with it for years. But as soon as I started driving horse trailers, it's like all of a sudden it got serious and I took it up to another level. So, but I also think that that's another thing. You just got to do the miles on that and back it up. So the last place we boarded our horses, I had the kind of a narrow lane next to the arena, and I was in the tack rooms at the other end. It's like, I'm going to back this thing all the way to the end of the lane here, narrow, and it just fidgeted down in there. And like the lights came on all of a sudden. I've cracked the code on trailer backing, but I shouldn't say that because the next time I do, I'm going to take the wheel fender off it or something. So
I like the question because it's a lot like riding a horse. The biggest mistake people make is that they do too much.
Yep.
They're not, you're oversteering, and then you have to correct for the oversteer, and it just becomes this cycle of problems. Yep. If you watch someone back in a trailer well, they don't look like they're doing a lot. Just like if you watch someone riding a horse at a high level, they don't look like they're doing a lot either, right?
Right. Well, I hoped I'd learned from the masters, because back in the day, I worked as a whitewater rafting guide, and the bus drivers had a trailer full of whitewater rafts on the back here, and those guys could back it down anywhere. And like you said, the less you do, the better, which is a lot like horsemanship. The less you do is the better.
DIY or sub it out? Are you figure it out and do it, or let somebody else figure it out and just pay them?
Might depend a little bit on the category, but I will try and figure it out myself until I realize I'm spending way too much time and money trying to figure it out, and I can get somebody to come in and do it in 10 minutes for half the price. So I'll start off DIY, fiercely DIY, and then I will get to the point where I recognize where I've reached my limit and get out the checkbook.
Bay or sorrel?
Bay or sorrel? I don't know if I really have a color preference in horses, but yeah, I like them both. And I guess maybe a little bit towards the bay, but who knows? I'm pretty color neutral. Yeah.
Even beyond those two colors, like our roans or paints or any other buckskins or something, anything else that really catches your eye?
My big horse is a buckskin, and I think he's the handsomest horse I've ever seen. He's a old Hollywood Dunnet quarter horse, and he's a pretty good looking guy. And then the Palomino mare, she's got a spot in my heart too. So, but the grays, the Gruyas, some of the Mustang colors we see coming in, they're just incredible. Can't say there's a color I just don't like. It's okay, white horses, that's fine. It's like somebody asked me once, "What's your favorite kind of wine?" I was like, "Well, the one I'm drinking right now." And he's like, "Really? What's so special about that?" I was like, "Nothing. It's just the one I'm drinking right now." So
whenever you meet a set of twins, do you ever have the urge to ask if they're aware that one of them was unplanned?
I don't think that thought has ever crossed my mind.
It will from now on, though.
Yeah, right.
I'm planting seeds over here.
I did have a twin brothers as friends in high school, and just one of them was like, "Hey, I'm your older brother," and the other one's like, "Yeah, but like a minute." So now I'm going to be thinking about that. Right.
Dogs or cats?
I would love to have a dog. The place that I lived isn't really conducive to it. I want my dog to have space, and I want him to be able to run around and be happy and healthy. So we have settled on cats. My wife and daughter love them. This pair are the furriest little terrorists I've ever met. I mentioned I'm staying here at my sister's, and she has two cats, and they're really shy. And I was prepping dinner the other night, and I got food out all over this countertop. And I told my wife I did something I haven't done in years, which was walk out of the kitchen when there was food there, because our cats are on the counter like that. And you wouldn't believe the chunks of food they've stolen over time. So I I like them both, but I would love to have a dog. Yeah.
You own a dog and you feed a cat. Absolutely convinced. Um, does pineapple belong on pizza?
Only if there's jalapeno on it too.
Oh, I like that. Yep, a little
Gotta have
sweet, a little
hot and
spicy.
sweet. Yep. Yep. Those two have
Absolutely.
to be together. Yeah.
Thick or thin crust?
I'm gonna go with thin. I don't mind a good doughy slice once in a while, but thin crust that's the way to go. It's what I was kind of raised on. So
So you mentioned cooking dinner. Do you cook very much, or is it a rare occasion?
no, I do cook, and I do enjoy it. So being here on a little bit of a vacation, we're get a chance to use somebody else's grill and find out where the hot spots are. And I do enjoy cooking, and we have a group of friends back home that it's pretty regular. We'll get together and throw something together.
Do you have a favorite meal to cook?
I do a lot of grilling. I like to make short ribs, slow cooked kind of things, braised short ribs, uh, risotto. It's a lot of fun to make. So, yeah.
Okay. Do you have a horse industry related pet peeve?
Horse industry related pet peeve. I think the biggest one right now is just there's just too much negativity in some of the social media stuff and the disciplines. Too many people being critical. You got to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes before you really say something about it. And I think that we are kind of damaging our own selves and our own industry by not being more supportive of our friends and colleagues out there. I'd like to see us kind of get out of that, like all the stuff that pops up on all the social media groups after somebody we looked up to is found to have made a mistake at some point. It could have been years ago, and they get dragged through the mud. And I think we should just be asking a lot more questions than jumping to so many conclusions.
That's a good one. It certainly is a prevalent deal in this day and age.
Yeah.
Would you say you know more about your horse or your wife?
Well, she's fortunate in that I do spend a lot more time with her. So the horse is probably, he's wondering where we've been and why are we late for feeding him. But they're both still a mystery to me in a lot of ways, that's for sure. But I think that I know a lot about my wife, and I still have a lot more to learn. But the same thing's true with my horse. I don't like to assume I know it, because then they show me something I don't know. So yeah.
I think the recognition that both are still a mystery is probably a gift right there. When you think you haven't figured it out, that's when you're setting yourself up on the edge of a cliff.
Yep.
Feral or spoiled? Which type of horse would you prefer to deal with?
Well, we get to deal with a lot of feral horses in the Mustang world, the Mustang work that we do. The spoiled horse, as a body worker, I see a lot of that too. And it's not that I want to help them both. And I think sometimes the spoiled horse It certainly isn't the horse's fault. It's always the human made them that way. And I think I'd rather work with the horse than the human. I know that. That's why I work on horses. People often say, do you do this kind of body work on people? And my response is, oh my God, no. I wouldn't do that. But I think they both need our attention and our help. And but I'll come back around to it. I think I would want to help the spoiled horse more because that horse didn't deserve to be turned into that. Whereas the feral horse, he's just fine being feral. Doesn't need me to come along and make his life better. He's doing just fine, hopefully. So,
what is your least favorite barn chore?
Our paddock, we're in Southern California and we've got this beautiful hillside paddock. And when it rains, it just goes to mud. And it's got just enough of a slope that these older arthritic horses are slip sliding around. So going out there and trying to catch that Palomino mare when she's wet and cold and it's muddy, I've got a number of incidents where I've come home just totally covered head to toe in mud because I slipped and fell and trying to catch that mare and get her over to the barn before she got totally hypothermic on us. So yeah, slopping around in the mud in the rain that'd have to be my least favorite one.
What's your favorite barn chore?
My favorite barn chore is to sit at sunset while the horses are eating their buckets, and I'll crack open a beer and put my feet up and watch the sunset and listen to them chew. And to me, the horse flopping around in that bucket is one of the most relaxing sounds. Now, if I can hear a human chewing their food, we've got big problems. But the sound of a horse crunching away at his food is one of the most relaxing things I can imagine. So
that's kind of funny how
yeah.
I forget what it is, but there's a term, a psychological term for that some people will hear a human chew and it sends them into blind rage.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, so you're a body worker. We have sort of this conformational standard that we apply to horses. Are there any things that are outside of the norms of conformational standards that might be considered flaws that you actually prefer to see?
But something that might be a conformational flaw that I'd like to see. Well, it's not a conformational flaw, but I know some people aren't as crazy about it. But that kind of Roman nose on some of the Iberian horses, the Andalusians, Lusitanos, some of those bigger horses, when they get that Roman nose, that's something that I like seeing. Sometimes we'll see. A lot of times what I see from the bodywork side of it is not necessarily conformational, but postural changes that the rider has induced into that horse just through imbalance and what have you. And that's turning your question around. I'd like to see those postural challenges be reduced so that horse can get back to its natural conformation and be able to move freely and efficiently. But I like a Roman nose. I got a Hollywood Dunnet quarter horse, so I like big butts. I cannot lie. So
I'm actually kind of a fan of the Roman nose horses myself, particularly the quarter horses. I had one when I was in college. It was a took on trade to sell kind of a horse, and he was the sorrel flaxen mane, chromed up, a little bit of a Roman nose. I think he was just about as gorgeous as they come. So. Yeah.
One of my mentors early on, she saw my buckskin Jesse, and he's got that little patch of mane that hangs over one side and the rest is on the other side. Some people call that a ragged mane. And she said, as a horse show judge, I have to say that's disgusting and mark you down. But as your friend, I think it's adorable. So.
Some of the things we have arbitrarily decided to judge horses on is really just makes you scratch your head. But yeah. Where are you sorest right now?
I'm sore from sitting and driving the last few days, so kind of low back because we drove from upstate New York down to the city to drop my daughter off at college, and then turned around the next day and drove back. And I drive a lot for the work that I do, and I don't usually feel sore from 2, 3, 4 hour drives, which in the horse world, that's a short commute. But for some reason, this drive down and back got to me. So yeah, low back right now. Now I'm thinking about all the other places I'm sore. Where's that biofreeze?
Oh, there you go. What is the ideal number of hours per day of solitude for you?
I can be with people, but I can also I love solitude. I can just be quiet all day long. I can listen to my own thoughts or work on horses. So there's no upper limit to that for me. It's like I say, I love being around people and things like that, but I would just as soon have it be quiet. Like I said, driving from job to job, there's times when the radio's off and it's just the miles going by, and I'm fine with that. So yeah.
Do you have any favorite words of wisdom or some type of a saying that you carry with you and remind yourself of periodically?
Yeah, I got a handful of things that float around like that, but there's two. One is a saying by a French philosopher who said, "Perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away." And I really think less is more in our lives is real important. And the other one is a quote from a philosopher, where he says, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." So I think that quote, really trained me to try to be more of a listener and take things in rather than fill up the air with words unnecessarily. So, but I think less is more, especially when it comes to body work and nutrition, really, and horsemanship. What is it? I think the Ray Hunt used to say, you need to do less sooner because you're doing too much too late. Kind of try to avoid getting into situations like that. So,
very true.
Yeah.
Crunchy or smooth peanut butter?
I don't do peanut butter. I have had a peanut allergy since way before it was hip to have a peanut allergy. So, but if I go with almond butter, I usually go smooth.
It's kind of weird. Like when I think of peanut butter, crunchy seems to just make perfect sense. But then if you thought of like Nutella or almond butter with chunks in it, that seems gross. That's weird. It's a bias and a hypocrisy going through the smooth nut world that we need to address here. Would you tell us something unexpected about you?
Something unexpected about me. I think it amuses a lot of my clients. I do work a lot in the dressage and working equitation barns, and they don't expect a guy in boots and jeans and a Western shirt to show up. But when they see that, they expect country music, but it's actually more like punk rock and heavy metal coming out of the speakers as I'm going along. So, like I said, I do drive a lot for work, and a lot of times when I'm driving, I'm rocking out. So,
are we talking like some Slipknot and Pantera there, or what?
On the metal side, more like Tool and old Black Sabbath, stuff like that. And living in the Los Angeles area for a while, I was able to see some great shows back in the day and a lot of the punk rock shows as that scene was coming up. So, yeah.
If you could choose any new skill, superpower, or ability, what would you choose? Just snap your fingers and all of a sudden you can do blank.
I would just really love to be able to understand what the horses are thinking. There's so many things we do where we project human thoughts and ideas on horses, and in working with Jim Masterson and Mark Rashid and Dr. Stephen Peters, it's amazing how much stuff we've just made up that's flat out wrong about how horses think. And I guess the thing I really want to be able to have them communicate to me and me to communicate back to them is, do you feel okay? It's like when we go into the doctor, they say, tell me where it hurts. And we have to do that differently with horses. We have to watch them. We have to palpate their bodies, understand how they're supposed to move ideally. But boy, wouldn't it be great if you could just walk in there and say, something going on with my stifle, right stifle. Can you take a look at that? But I also kind of wonder truly what are they thinking? And I often think, with the horse's eyes on the side of their head instead of binocular stereo vision, it's like, what does that look like? Really? I mean, we can't even imagine what that looks like. Could you imagine being able to see that, except for that little spot behind your head and all that? So yeah, I would love to know what's going on in there.
I think the fact that you're aware of and curious that it's not what we think it is for the most part that's an important step. Way too many people are anthropomorphizing constantly, and they don't even know that they're doing it. And
oh gosh, yeah.
I may not know exactly what he's thinking, but I know it's not that.
Right.
You kind of have yeah.
Well, at one of the Mark and Jim shows a year or so ago, it probably happens every year. The horse and rider will come into the arena and it's their turn to work with Mark Rashid, and they'll tell him the story. And he'll stand there and he's super polite and he listens to it all. And he'll say at the end, well, that's just a great story, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on here. And he says it in such a kind way that, you don't feel like a knucklehead for thinking that. And he really has a great way of opening your eyes to maybe there's a different way to look at this and not layer so much stuff on top of what probably is a real simple issue.
Yeah. I know just what you're talking about. Most of the time, within the first sentence, within 10 or 15 seconds, we kind of have an idea of what's going on, and the next 7.5 minutes aren't really needed at all in that whole history we get. But what would you have been professionally if not a horseman or body worker or nutritional advisor, consultant, representative?
Well, it's actually my second career. I'm not, like I said, this is adult onset here. And what I did before this was work in the kind of outdoor adventure and wilderness recreation kind of field. So I mentioned river guide, ski guide, rock climbing, surfing, all that stuff. So I did that for 30 something years. And now people say, oh, is your shoulder messed up from all the horse stuff? It's like, no, the shoulder's messed up from all the fun I had in my 20s and 30s doing that stuff. But I think if I was like to go back and do it all again, and horsemanship was not an option, I think I might have been a philosopher. I might have sat and read books, and if I could find somebody to pay me to do that, I might still shift over into it. Think about things and read and write books, something like that.
So we mentioned music just a minute ago. What year did music end for you? So the bands you went to were a little bit older than the bands I went to. Are you still listening to modern stuff, or is like 1991 where it all ended and you just stayed before that, or what?
I'm pretty set in that kind of classic rock, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. There's still music that pops up now that I really like, but I think probably early 2000s was the peak, and keep looking back to the earlier times for the good stuff.
Do you appreciate any modern country? Like I could, for some reason, I could see you enjoying a Chris Stapleton Tennessee whiskey kind of a groove or something like that. Yep.
I like Chris Stapleton. I have clients up in Bakersfield, and I used to work up on the Kern River, so Buck Owens and Merle Haggard were real important back then. But the sort of pop country that's running around today doesn't quite do it for me, but I do like Chris Stapleton. There's a new guy that I got to see a little while ago. You might want to check him out. He goes by the name of The Bones of J.R. Jones.
Okay.
And he's got this, like, he can do the lonesome cowboy singing by the campfire. He can do the bluesy, gritty down south kind of sound, and it's kind of that one man band approach to making music. So he's been one of my new faves.
I'll check him out.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Are you decisive or indecisive?
Oh, I'm decisive. I will fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So I will just say we're doing this, and if it's the wrong thing and it goes to hell in a handcart, then I'll figure it out after that. But the indecision, that's one of my that's a pet peeve for me. And in fact, I think probably Jesse helped me out with that because when I first got that horse, the people who owned him before, they would ride together, as a couple, and they'd get to the junction of the trail and they'd be like, well, which way do you want to go today, honey? Oh, I don't care. You pick. Oh, no, you pick, sweetie. And the horse would sit there and go, come on, where are we going? Let's just go. And I think he and I are a lot alike in that regard. It's like, we're going to the left. Even if it takes us off a cliff, we're going that way. So,
Full send, baby. Yep.
all right.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
Yeah, kind of hard to narrow it down. I have a Bozal that gentleman named Brad Tarp out here in California made, and he is just not only is he a heck of a braider, but he's a, just an incredible human being. And he and his wife Rosemary are. I look forward to seeing them every year at the Skills of the Rancho, that California Bridle Horse Association event. And I have way too many pairs of split reins. I just get a pair, on a lot of times they're used or swap meet or something like that. But I just love sometimes you got one that's, an inch wide and sometimes they're 3/4, but they're thicker. And I just love the feel of those. And yeah, and then I put a pair of nice, what's the gentleman's name who made them? Don Orell wooden stirrups on my saddle. And I really like those and I love the way they look.
Big bell stirrups, I'm assuming.
Not too big. It didn't go full on with the silver on the outside and all that, just kind of subdued. But that they're on the saddle that I had saved up for years to get and then throw it on my horse. And I'm riding with my trainer. And she said, I don't think that saddle fits your horse. And I just said, you shut your mouth. This saddle fits this horse just fine. And she said, well, it's tipped over. It's tipped over. It's not centered on him. And I was like, that's not the saddle. That's me. I'm always like that. She watched me ride a little bit. She's like, yeah, you're right. It's you. You're out of balance. So
Ear bonnet or no ear bonnet?
oh yeah. Well, Jesse's got to have it because he cannot stand flies in his ears. The only time he's uncooperative is when the flies are bothering him. So he actually lives in his paddock in fly season with a fly mask on 24/7. So yeah, I'm not opposed to the ear bonnet. I think, and I do a lot of the jumper shows and stuff like that, and I just love how they got the bonnet that matches the bridle, that matches the gloves, that matches the boots, that matches the little strap that holds the spur on. They got it all figured out. So
Priorities in line. Yes, sir.
as long as it all matches, you got that one. If that ear bonnet did not match the little rubber strap that holds the spur on, I just can't look at it anymore.
Cold showers or cold food forever? If you had to pick one, which would you pick?
I'd probably have to go cold food because I can't do the cold shower thing. And all these folks doing that whole ice bath plunge thing right now. I mean, my hand gets too cold when I reach down to the bottom of the cooler to get a beer in the icy water there. I got to get out of there quick and let that hand warm up. And also lately, I grew up in upstate New York, so we're used to crazy cold winters up here. But after living in Southern California for all these years, I think I have to turn in my Adirondack boy card because I can't handle the cold like I used to. So cold shower, that would be a big challenge for me. But I just, had a cold piece of pizza for breakfast and there's nothing wrong with that.
Cold fried fish is one of the best breakfasts that there are. Left over from last night does not get better than that. What is the best smell in the barn?
The best smell in the barn, just when you get up right next to your horse and you're grooming them and you smell their mane, just that horse smell right there next to them. And I think smells really do trigger a lot of deep memories and probably release some happy chemicals in our brains and all that. But that's the one that does it for me. Just Yeah, it's almost like when your kids were little and you just smell the top of their hair. That was just the best smell too. But yeah, that's that for sure.
If people will pay $300 for a candle that smells like Gwyneth Paltrow's nether regions, we should have a candle that smells like a horse, right? I mean, that's long overdue. We have the technology. We can
Yep.
build him. I
Yep.
mean, come on.
Yep.
Somebody out there get this done. Sweet, salty, or spicy?
All the above, but spicy is always my go-to.
Are you sure you're from New York? Are you adopted or anything like that? Or
You might wonder, huh? Yeah, I love the hot sauce jalapenos. I used to make when I had a garden, I would grow jalapenos and make my own. I would smoke the peppers and onions and tomatoes on the grill and mix them all up. And yeah, spicy is good. I have a heck of a sweet tooth though, and if somebody says when the waitress says who wants dessert, I do. So yeah.
a caramel turtle cheesecake, please.
And when they show up with 5 forks for the other people, I was like, "What are you doing? What are these extra forks for?"
What is your favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Deep sea creature. I'm going to go with the Kraken, the great sea squid from down below. That, yeah.
I like it. Wouldn't it
Yep.
have been cool to live in the time of the megalithic animals? I mean, we're just 10,000 years removed from woolly mammoths walking North America, giant
Yeah.
sloths 10 feet tall. I mean, I want to live in that world, just
Right.
walking around and there's a giant sloth. I like,
When you
yeah.
come to LA, we'll go out to the La Brea tar pits because they got all that, all the museum of the woolly mammoths and the dire wolf and the dawn horse and there's people in there too, and so it's all these crazy critters that were from back then. Yeah, well, that's probably because we grew up with that Land of the Lost cartoon as kids, on Saturday mornings where they got transported back into dinosaur times, and I'd go.
Well, I grew up, we had a place called Poverty Point right down the road, which was a it was a series of large Indian mounds that they built, and they had the atlatl and all that stuff. And so that was a reality. You're like, I mean, right here, right where I'm standing, they were hunting woolly mammoths just a little while ago, something. Have you ever had a UFO encounter?
Well, yeah, I couldn't figure out what it was that was flying up there, so it was unidentified. But given all that time I spent back in my earlier days in the backcountry, looking up at starry skies, definitely saw some things that were not fitting into the category of planet, star, meteor, things like that. Like when you think it's a meteor and it goes kind of zigzags on you, something's up.
I've had almost the exact same that is that a star or whatever, and then it zigzags in front of your eyes and like, okay, I'm just a little blip in the world of atoms over here. All right, well, that concludes our lightning round questions, and I'm going to tabulate your score here real quick. I have got you at 3,891 points, which makes you our reigning high scorer of all time for the lightning round questions, Will. And that entitles you to either a genuine compliment or an awkward silence, your choice.
I think we can go with awkward silence.
Those are so satisfying for me. I love it when people choose them like it's that's when you're in the same tribe. When someone is good with an awkward silence, like yeah, sure.
Creating awkward silence or just being in it, I'm good with either.
Oh, well, Will Friday, would you give us kind of the 30,000 foot view of what all it is that you do in the horse world?
Well, I'm based in Southern California in the Los Angeles area, and I'm primarily a Masterson Method practitioner and instructor. I met Jim Masterson 15 or so years ago when I was getting back into horses and big career shift out of the previous work that I was doing. And it's just grown from there. I started building a practice in equine bodywork and then became interested in nutrition. And that's been growing as I go along too. So I do the nutrition consulting and some product sales for people. But basically, I travel throughout Southern California working with all kinds of horses, providing Masterson Method bodywork. And I've also learned, when Jim handed me my final certification paperwork, he said, now the real learning starts. And he's really good. And being an instructor of his 2-day courses for him, you really have to stay in the Masterson lane. And Jim is really good. He's aware of all this other stuff that's going on out there, but he just says, just stick with this while you're with me. So, I have learned some other things, and he's been super supportive of that. But it's just that unending quest to help these horses out. So, yeah, I personally, like I say, I have 2 horses that I've owned for about 10 years, and they're pretty much retired now. So we just get them out and walk them around, my wife and I. But I do ride occasionally with some endurance riders. So we get out there on these 25, 30-mile rides in the desert in the wintertime that are just a blast. And I work a lot. Like, people sometimes ask, what kind of horses do you work with the most? What disciplines or breeds? And I do have a lot of dressage horses and a lot of people in the working equitation world, which combines dressage and the ease of handling and the speed work, and occasionally cattle handling. So they've become a really great group of people to work with. But I work with, what kind of horses do I work with? The 4-legged kind. And if you give me a 3-legged one, I'll figure out how to work with him too.
So, that kind of brings up a couple of questions. You said 15 years ago, so that puts you near the start of Jim formalizing a program or everything. So are you kind of one of his first, or within the first 2 or 3 years of him starting all of that?
Yeah, I met Jim at the Horse Expo in Southern California, and it was when he still just had his first DVD of horse massage that he put together first. And when I met him, he said, well, next time I see you, my book will be out. And sure enough, next year, it was right when the book came out. And he had already got he had a handful of people, you met some of them last year, Becky and Vicky over in England, and, folks like that have been with him for a real long time. But I think I am right at the cutoff for being one of the OGs in the Masterson method. It's been 15 something years, and yeah, I'm happy to have met him, and he's changed my life. And look what I get to do on a day-to-day basis. It's the best thing I could imagine.
He's a good dude. I can't sing his praises enough. There are definitely some people in the horse business that you hear about, then you meet, and you wind up a little disappointed. Jim Masterson is not one of those people. He is everything you hope that he might be, and even more, and a truly kind and helpful guy. Really, really is.
Absolutely. And as you spend more time with him, the layers of his knowledge, you get to see the next level of it. And what, just like you said, kind, generous, and just so down to earth. He's truly one of the best people I know.
So you're now helping to teach some of those courses as well as being a practitioner yourself. So how has that shift been? Have you found that teaching has actually taught you as much as you're teaching them? It kind of forces you to know your stuff and articulate a little differently, or how's that affected you?
Well, absolutely. My previous career, I was actually more of the trainer type of person. So I was not just teaching people to rock climb. I was teaching the people who teach the people how to rock climb. So I've always had an educational background, and I've always felt like, the top of the pyramid of understanding what you're doing is when you can share it with another person and they get it. So when I took my 2-day course with Jim, at the end of it, we were sitting there and having a beer, surprise, surprise. And he says, "What do you want to do with this?" And I said, I'm all in. I want to go, I want to work for you. I said that to him right there. And he's like, "All right, there's a course in Stanford in a month. I'll get you a spot on it and we'll see you there." And teaching this has always been really important to me. And I think that just it's rooted in that wanting to help people help their horses. So it's not like I can only do this. It's this magic, the secret that I have here that only I know. That's one of the other things I love about Jim's approach is he says anybody can do this. And at the same time, you can do it at a level where you're a professional practitioner and it all works that way. I really like that fact of Masterson Method work.
Yeah, he's not a gatekeeper, that's for sure. He's happy to help you and teach you, and he's not holding back the good stuff or anything like that.
Well, actually, he does a little bit because he's got everything that's out there in the books and the DVDs and online and what people go through in the 2-day weekend seminar. Then there's the 5-day advanced course. Well, when you go through to the certification process and you finish all your certification, you have a final checkout course. And it used to be that only Jim did it. Jim did those checkout courses, and he would watch you do day and a half or so, work on a bunch of horses and just make sure you're doing it all right. And then on the second day and a half, second half of the course, he would drop a whole bunch of techniques on you that he calls the phase 3 techniques. And those are the ones that there's no videos floating around out there. There's no manual on that. That's all direct Dharma transmission from the master at that last couple of days of the course. And he, I think he did a great job in kind of icing your cupcake at the end of all that work for you. That really was a great way to feel like you had graduated, and then you got, not only did you get your diploma, but you got the next level. I know, and he's continually coming up with new stuff, and he think people share techniques with him, and he sees how it fits in. So, but yeah, he's certainly not a gatekeeper. He's got a big tent, and everybody's welcome in it.
And I didn't mean to make this a Masterson Method commercial or anything, but I am curious here. He's in the last couple of years come out with the dog book and the dog stuff. Have you practiced any of that sort of thing? Are you using that as your inlet to pet the neighbor's dogs and get your dog fix going on? Or
Well, Jim was talking about the dog book for years, and it all comes around to you go to a party or a barbecue, and folks like me are more likely to talk to the dog than some of the other people there. And before you know it, you're wiggling their cervical vertebrae around, you're petting them, and let's see what happens there. So a whole bunch of us were playing with it, Masterson Method for Dogs long before Jim got the book done. But yeah, I have, and I'm really enjoying that. The big difference between the horses and the dogs is you could do a session with a horse that's an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes, and they'll just relax into it. Well, the dogs often are like, you'll do a few releases on them, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then they just get up and go over and lay down and fall asleep. So your timing and the sessions there are different, but it is good because I don't have a dog, and I love being around them. And we were at the World Equestrian Center with folks from the Legacy Equine Nutrition program in Ocala, and Dr. Rachel Mote, the founder of that program, she had this little lap dog, real sweet little pup, and we were at this event, and the dog was nervous. There's all these people around, and I said, "Well, let her sit on my lap." And I started doing some TMJ and some bladder meridian, and this nervous little dog was just asleep in my lap, and she's like, she never does that. I was like, well, she can, it's just, yeah. Yeah, the dog stuff is great. I did tell Jim that I've already got the cat book written for him, and it's 1 page long. And it's basically, you start with the TMJ technique, and the cat says, "Oh yeah, that's perfect. That's great. Yeah, keep doing that." "Nah, you're doing it wrong. I'm leaving. Stupid humans." That's the cat book.
I was going to say, yeah, if the dog sessions are 15 minutes long, then the cat sessions are 15 seconds. And on
That's
second
right.
17, you're attacked and bitten and clawed. And yeah.
Yeah. But it is interesting because Jim, he's he's a great horseman, but he's also a really astute student of animal behavior and responses. And that's why I think the Masterson method is so effective, is that you really have to follow the responses the animal gives you and step back and do nothing. And those are two things, stepping back and doing nothing is really hard for a lot of people, giving the animal time to process it, but really observing what's going on with them is so important. And I think that's why, the being able to be solid in solitude, like the best sessions I have with the horses are when nobody else is in the barn. I can work with horses when there's, all this activity going on, and I can carry on a conversation with people while I'm doing it. But to really get in there and feel what's going on and connect with the horse at that level, it's great when you're first person in the barn in the morning and nobody else is around. And yeah.
For sure. I know just what you mean. And most people, that definitely goes in with they do too much too fast, right? If you do things at a micro speed and you give the horse plenty of time to process, you're going to be in a whole different level of connection with them than where you are right now. And Jim Steele does a fantastic job of that. I wanted you brought up body language a little bit. That's honestly one of the parts of the Masterson method that kind of fascinates me, because teaching people to read a horse's body language, in my mind, if you ask me the question, like, how long does it take to read a horse and get good at that? I'm going to answer that in terms of decades, probably. Yet Jim manages to take people through these weekend courses, and he has, some pretty well-defined signs that you're looking for. And I would actually say that y'all, it's one of the first things I noticed about that particular group was the level at which the average person in that group could read a horse's body language was far beyond the average horse person, even though a lot of those people don't have the decades, that they're maybe a little newer or and so how would you view that? What's the secret to decoding the body language and the importance of it and all of that?
I think that it is really just trusting yourself to be able to observe the changes that are happening in the horse right in front of you. And like I often say, the hardest part of being a Masterson Method practitioner is convincing the person that by you just barely touching the horse, you're doing something. But once you feel the effect of the bladder meridian, or Jim talks about it in terms of pressure, the air gap kind of contact with the horse, once you get a taste of that, you're going to be looking for it for the rest of your life, because it's the best thing. And it changes the way you relate to the horse, because when we're doing that air gap kind of contact, just barely touching the horse's hair along that bladder meridian, after you've been doing it for a while, I don't know how long, but you start to see the things that happen before the things that happen, and what's coming here. So it's like it's a little bit of carnival barker salesmanship, but I'll be standing there talking to a new client and have my fingers on the TMJ of the horse, just barely touching it. And I can see the little change in the corner of the horse's mouth and the little change in their nostril and the little change in their eye. And I'll say, well, he's going to blink in a second. And then right after that, probably be 5-6 seconds, he'll start licking and chewing. And right on schedule, it happens. And it's because of me and a lot of other people have spent enough time slowing down and watching and waiting for that sign before the sign comes up. It's sort of like driving down the highway and you see your exit's coming up in 5 miles, and then your exit's coming up in 2 miles, and then your exit's coming up in 1 mile. Being able to read that part of the horse is what kind of opens up your awareness to them. And I think the biggest challenge is getting the real analytical thinkers out of their brain and into their body and into their fingertips when they're doing this. Because you'll have people on the 2-day course are like, well, I'm 2.7 centimeters from the crest of the seventh vertebrae. Is that the right spot? And I'd say you should ask the horse that question, and the horse is going to tell you if it's the right spot if they're showing you signs of response and release. But yeah, I think it's one of those things, like, if people who are golfers, you hit that swing and it's just perfect and it goes straight down the fairway, and it's like you want to do this for the rest of your life. And then if you're me, the next shot you hit it fat and the ball goes 6 feet and that jolt of pain goes up into your elbow and you're like, this is a stupid game. We don't have that as often, I think, in the horse world. Is we keep getting inspired. There's more to inspire us there than there is to confound us, I think.
I, for one, I'm excited that more people are learning to read body language better, and that we have more of this talk of biomechanics, some of the underlying things, and an understanding of what's really happening here. One of the things I put in my presentations, and I kind of started it a little bit as a joke, but I put in there a warning that once we point some of these body language signs out, you're not going to be able to unsee them, and you're going to see that they're everywhere, that there's way more horses in distress than you ever thought possible.
Exactly.
There are certain events I just can't watch anymore just because it's a blaze orange billboard running across back and forth in front of me, and why the hell are y'all still doing this? But why don't we talk a little bit about nutrition, and then we'll come back to some other things. So where in your timeline does the Legacy Equine Nutrition program come in? Was that about the same time as Masterson Method, or later, earlier? How did that play out for you?
I've been involved with the Legacy program for 4 years. Dr. Rachel Motet started that, and it was during the pandemic when she created these online courses using Zoom, and she's got an amazing educational platform out there that I'm not even sure how I found out about it, but I'm sure glad I did. But prior to that, because I started out as a sales rep for some nutrition products, and one of the people that I worked with there said, now not only do you have to know everything about this particular product, but you have to know everything about every other product on the market. So that's going on over 10 years ago, and it became sort of the training provided by the manufacturers of the products, and then meeting other nutritionists, and so people are clear on what it is. And I appreciate you use the correct term for what I do. Is I'm a nutrition advisor, and the word nutritionist is really reserved for people who have at least a master's degree, if not a PhD, in animal science or nutrition. So I study under nutritionists, and I was lucky to meet people through those things, through those various companies, who were the nutritionists for those companies, and they provided in-house training. And then I just kind of went down the rabbit hole online, and what really inspired me to get into nutrition more was I did have to take animal nutrition in a horse science program I went through, and the professor's his nickname was Dr. Cows. So in a 15-week semester, we had about 10 weeks of cow nutrition and 5 weeks of everything else. And there were a whole bunch of us horse science people sitting up in the back row going, that's it. And so we all felt like we had to go out and find some more info on that. So it was a little bit of a disappointment that spurred me on to really go into the nutrition side of things, because it came out of bodywork. Because I'd see a couple of things. I'd see conditions in horses and start to think, is there a nutritional component to this? And then the other thing I saw was I would see these feed rooms with shelves and shelves and shelves of supplements in there, and it was just a chemistry lab practically. And each one of those buckets was really just hundreds of dollars that this horse owner was spending in the hopes of doing right by their horse. But there was just, there's marketing, there's conflicting information, there's downright nonsense garbage products out there. And I just saw a lot of money being thrown at this stuff that I would rather have them throw that money at me as a body worker than them at, some glorified do nothing product that they're feeding their horse for $3 a day. But the
Yeah.
Legacy program has been just amazing because I'm in the very first group of people that took this on, and it's not just a nutrition education program. It really became a community of exciting and diverse people. So there's a high dressage trainer in there. There's an eventing trainer. There's an endurance rider. There's a couple of veterinarians, and the groups just keep growing. And now what happens is if I get a case that I need some help on, I can pop my case up on the Facebook page that the equine nutrition advisors have together, and I can get some, answers to my questions real quick. So Rachel did a great job creating a community as well. And she was an industry professional. She worked for Purina for 7 years. She taught for many years. And so she knows everybody. And what's been great about this now is we've got really the top people in equine nutrition at our fingertips. I can call, if I have a question about equine ulcers, I can call Dr. Ben Sykes, who's the guy when it comes to equine ulcers. If I have a question about mineral balances in a product, I can call Katie Young, who formulated probably half the feeds in most of the feed stores in the country over her 25 plus year career. If a client says, "Hey, I'm feeding this brand from such and such a manufacturer," chances are pretty good that I could reach out to the person who either works there or maybe even the one who formulated it and said, "Hey, tell me about this ingredient. What are you doing with that?" So it's been a great, more than just an education, it's been a community of real exciting people to work with.
Let's put a pin in that. I think this is a pretty good segue to jump into our sponsor for this particular episode. And I think we found a good one for you here. Our sponsor for this episode of the Adult Onset Horsemanship podcast is Golden Shower Osmotic Shampoo and Supplements. That old red salt block is killing your horse. The minerals and micronutrients your horse needs for optimum performance, longevity, and quality of life are lacking. The grains and forages are decreasing in their ability to supply our horses with all they need to live their best life. At Golden Shower Osmotic Shampoo and Supplements, we think solving all of those issues is best done in the wash rack. The wash rack, you ask? Yes, the wash rack. The digestive system of today's horses is so disrupted and unnatural that we've benevolently decided it's best to just avoid the GI altogether. Our patented osmotic shampoo delivery system will pass through the blood-hair barrier quickly and provide your horse with vital trace minerals it's lacking. How's your horse going to prance down the barn aisle or into the arena like a supermodel if the best hair care products aren't in their shower caddy? We've got the scents and dyes you want too, like Frisian frankincense, Stallion sandalwood, vanilla lime lusitano, peony pony, jasmine citrus chestnut, rose roan, coconut criollo, beach bay rum, Belgian beer soaps with hops, pre-IPA, and you can also try our newest calming supplement infused half lingering stillness, or our stronger yet still very safe cleaning product for the boys, Gardenia Gelding Debeaning Potion. As my wife says, a clean penis and sheath should smell like gardenias. We're still working out how to infuse turmeric without causing your horse to turn orange, but we're working on it. You might be on the cutting edge of human nutrition trying sublingual vitamins and supplements for quicker absorption. Well, pre-cross epithelial delivery of minerals and trace elements is going to be the next big thing. You wouldn't want your pony to think you don't really love him and want the best for him, would you? Our knowledge of osmosis goes back to France in 1748. Garnier died in 1751, long enough to learn the benefits of osmosis. Coincidence? We think not. Well cared for horses are bathed daily. Take advantage of our patented osmotic delivery shampoo and get your horse's nutrition problems resolved in the wash rack and have the assurance that your horse is the best smelling one in the barn. Golden Shower Osmotic Shampoo and Supplements. It's raining nature's tea. All right. I feel better now. I
I
don't
do
know about
too.
you.
It's well, it's you dropped one of our favorite miracle ingredients in there, turmeric, um, and that in the legacy group will often, what's the secret to this? How can it do all these amazing things? This new product you've discovered, there's no turmeric in it. So
Hmm.
that's where I've mentioned our supplement line here too, Placebo Plex.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
We're working on getting Placebo Plex Plus out to market because that's going to have the turmeric in it.
It's a little more expensive though. Is that correct? The
Well, yeah,
placebo. Yeah.
Placebo Plex Plus is designed for the horse owner with entirely too much money. Um, you know, but we joke about this, but I had a client. I go to her barn and her horse comes out of the bucket and its nose is just bright yellow. And I said, what's your guy eating there? And she's like, oh, that's turmeric. And I was like, well, you got a whole lot of it in there. And she's like, yeah, you're supposed to eat a lot of it to help with the inflammation and the coat color. And I was like, yeah, it won't help with that. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, you got to have two other ingredients in there in order to make that work. And, again, everybody's trying to do right and your product's going to sell. I mean, that's got hit written all over it, your golden shower there. But it's because people want the thing that makes their horse perform better or live longer or healthier and things like that. But yeah, throw the term in there that it works at the cellular level. That really helps with the marketing. Works at the cellular level, like
Yeah.
water
It's
works at the cellular level.
you got to be careful with those minerals and forages and all that don't work at the cellular level. Yeah, that can be very. I love
Right.
the term whole horse. I wrote a post on this and I really liked it. That I really felt like all of the competition to be an expert at the whole horse was too much. So I decided I was going to specialize. And if you needed to know about that little wrinkle of skin on the horse's elbow, I'm going to become the expert in that little wrinkle of skin. So whole horse isn't me, but little wrinkle of skin on the elbow, I got you covered on that. Oh, well, why don't we get into nutrition here a little bit? So your basic building blocks for a horse's nutrition would be first and foremost water, and secondly forages, and then thirdly we're getting into the grains or the supplements or whatever. When you see a person who is let's say ballpark spending $200 a month on their feed for their horse and $500 a month on the supplements to go along with that feed, would you say that they're doing something wrong there? Is that flipped upside down or what?
It depends. I always start off with like you said, forage, water, salt. Horses will survive, and it's a miracle that they can do that on turning really low grade plant products into this miracle known as the horse. But when we start getting into what we're looking at, performance horses or horses with maybe some medical situations, we might start looking at it because unfortunately there's no hay on God's green earth here that checks all the nutritional boxes for a horse. There are deficiencies in there. So we've got this mare in our paddock that somebody else owns, and that horse gets hay cubes, water, and an occasional salt. And she looks fantastic. She's overweight, but her coat's shiny. She looks great. Meanwhile, here's my two horses that are getting their supplements and their oils and their chia seeds and their turmeric and their placebo plex, and they're looking kind of scruffy. And I'm like, well, what the heck's going on here? And a lot of times it does we all know the saying, no hoof, no horse. There's a step before that is no gut, no horse. And if the horse's gut is in distress, then whether mild to severe, we're not going anywhere today. And we don't even get to look at the hoof because the gut is messed up. So what I see a lot of times is, again, people are trying to do right by their horse and they're adding another thing into the horse's diet. And if you carry that on to an extreme, you end up with horses that are really digestively imbalanced. And, the wall of the stall looks like a bad Jackson Pollock painting. There's an entire Facebook group dedicated to solving the problem of fecal water syndrome. And fecal water syndrome is a lot of times it's a sign of a really stressed gut. And if we can remove all those stresses and those horses oftentimes clear up, but a lot of times it's the best way to clear that up is to strip it all away and start from scratch again and add things one at a time and pay attention to the effect that one thing being added back in at a time has. So, I always start with, yes, forage first and forage as much as possible. And, I got a lot of people that want to have 24/7 access to hay for their horse. And that's great. That's ideal. The trick is you got to ride them. If you're going to feed them that much, you got to ride them that much, and you got to keep them in condition. Because again, that retired mare in our pasture, all she does is eat. She puts on 10 pounds here, no problem, but she's not getting the exercise. So forage first, and forage based is sometimes a misnomer to people. I think when you hear the name forage only or forage first, people are saying, I won't feed a commercially made feed like a Purina, Nutrina, Triple Crown, regional variations on that, because they don't trust those big corporations. But I used to kind of be in that camp too. I used to think, well, let's get a vitamin mineral product and some hay pellets, and we should probably be good here. But after joining the Legacy program, I was able to see the value in some of the commercially made feeds. Now, there are some ones out there that I think are a little questionable still, but I'm not as dyed in the wool, don't feed that stuff camp any longer. But typically hay is missing, depending on the region, there's probably a little deficiency in copper and zinc, possibly some vitamin E, maybe some omega-3s. The amino acids that we need might be deficient there, but most horses meet their protein requirements through even grass hay. It doesn't necessarily require alfalfa to do that, but really just want to try and help people understand that. And like I said at the start, getting a nutrition plan that is perfect, because not that there's anything more we need to add, but there's nothing left we can take away, which is a really crazy business plan as a supplement salesman. It's like, I'm here to tell you to stop using these things that I sell at some point. Somebody came to my booth at a recent show. I got a trailer with shelves in it, and I got my products displayed there, and somebody was like, God, does my horse need all of this? And I said, I certainly hope not. We've got options here, but it's not that you need one of everything that's on the rack here.
So if you're doing a consultation for somebody, do you typically go through the trouble of testing water for a high iron or something like that, or are we running forage tests, looking at like there's significant differences in quality in forages, but quality is a relative term because a horse is actually designed to thrive on low quality forage. Right. And for instance, like a grass hay would have a higher starch content than an alfalfa hay on average, and so forth. So how much of that are you looking at as your basis or your foundation starting point before we start to add and sure. So forth?
Well, forage testing, hay testing is, it's great if, and I do that for my clients, but you got to be buying a pretty significant quantity of hay. If I have clients who are saying, hey, we're going to buy a year's worth of hay, I'll go out. If the broker for the hay doesn't already provide a hay analysis, I'll say, before you go and drop $25,000 on this truckload of hay, we'll do a core sample, we'll send it off to Equi Analytical and get some numbers on it. And a lot of times that it's best to say, it's just kind of a quick thumbs up or thumbs down on that stack. And then if we know that this is what we're going to be feeding for the year, we can balance out the other nutrients based on that. For a lot of people who board at a boarding facility, and that if the boarding facility buys a year's worth of hay or 6 months or whatever, we can test it. But the average hobby, non-pro horse trainer or horse owner, they're buying 12, 15, 20 bales at a time maybe. And if it's coming from a different source over and over, we're going to be spending a lot of money on hay testing. So we can pull averages from Equi Analytical's database and get a good ballpark idea of what alfalfa grown in Southern California over the last 10 years looks like, and get an average and go from there. But really what we're looking at mostly in the hay is, the energy content. It'll give us the mineral breakdown. and then crude protein and lysine. There's two values in there that really kind of point towards palatability, and that's the ADF and NDF on a hay test, which is acid detergent fiber and neutral detergent fiber. And those are just tests that they do that are really looking at the amount of the more indigestible fibers in there. So as hay gets older, it gets stemmier. There's more pectin and lignin and hemicellulose and things like that in there. And if those values get over a certain number, you might be buying $25,000 worth of hay that your horses aren't going to eat. So we want to put the brakes on that process. When you mentioned testing the water for iron, it's pretty rare that horses truly develop iron overload. And Dr. Mote actually put together a panel of 7 equine nutrition PhDs to talk about iron in horses. And long story short, at the end of each person's little 15 or so minute presentation, she would ask them, are you concerned about iron overload in horses? And every single one of them said, not concerned with it at all. We don't need to add more iron to the horse's diet because there's plenty in the hay already. Typical horse gets something like 600% of its iron requirement from just forage alone. So there's just no need to add iron in there on top of that. But the horse does have a really good system for regulating iron uptake. And a lot of the iron in their diet is just not absorbable. It's not bioavailable. So there's been a bit of a tempest in a teapot over iron in the horse's diet. And it's one of the things I really enjoy telling people, you don't need to worry about that. Like that's one of my favorite things to do with people in nutrition is you really don't need to worry about that, which means you don't need to be spending money on that. But yeah, if we can't get a really good hay test, we can go off averages, and then we get a better than just blind guess, but we're pointing in the right direction with the hay test or going off averages.
So with that in mind and kind of keeping our forage as our base in terms of grains and starches and things, are there any fads going on in the world of equine nutrition that concern you or that we need to be a little more aware of? Kind of the emperor has no clothes, or do you feel like that is kind of the way things need to morph to into the lower starch type feeds, and worrying about insulin resistance or not creating that environment for inflammation and ulcers and gut problems and the microbiome and the this is a tremendously complex world. I know a lot more about it than the average person, and I know enough to know that I'd better be careful what I say because it sure is complex. You could take a wrong turn easily. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that one of my colleagues in the Legacy program has a great saying. There's 2 great sayings that Sue has. So shout out to my friend Sue here. She says, dose determines poison from remedy is one thing. So we often joke about the dangers of dihydrogen monoxide. That stuff's in everything. It can kill you. Dihydrogen monoxide not enough of it can kill you, and too much of it can kill you. And then she also has a great saying is horses don't eat percentages. So we look at a feed label and it says, well, it's this percent of starch or sugar, let's say 10% to make the math easy. Well, are we feeding that horse a pound of that product? Or are we feeding that horse 20 pounds of that product? Or are we feeding them an ounce of that product? You got to do the math to figure out the percentage, turning that into grams. And so when people say, I would never feed that feed because it's got 20% starch to it. And I was like, yeah, but you're feeding, I had somebody say, oh, I would never feed that product because it's got corn in it and corn's a high starch ingredient. I was like, yeah, but you're feeding 1 ounce of this product a day. And the amount of corn in there is pretty negligible and in a 1 ounce of this. So do the math on that first, but getting back to the whole sugar, starch, and insulin resistance question, that is a real kettle of fish and a real rabbit hole to go down. And there's a lot of really good work being done in those fields, but can we just keep the horse's diet as close to what they'd eat in a natural situation? And it is a low starch there. And then when we get into the performance horse, you got a barrel racer and she needs to blast out of the hole and go make those 3 turns. Yeah, that horse needs some sugar in its diet. But if you got my old horse that, mostly standing around swatting flies with his tail, he doesn't need a high sugar. So it's really tailoring it to the horse's needs. I had a client, they had a big old bag of sweet feed in there. And I was like, really? You want to feed that high NSC feed to your horses? And she said, oh, yeah, we're endurance riders. We go 50 miles here. This is like throwing kindling on a campfire. They're burning this up right away as they go along. Do I feed them this when we're back at home and they're standing around the pasture? No, but when they're out there. So, there's one of the most common answers we have in the horse business is, well, it depends on a lot of things. And that's where getting into the conversation and starting the education around it is so helpful with the horse and the human. Horses' energy is very different. They convert fiber into volatile fatty acids, which is then converted into energy. And sugar, I often tell people is trouble looking for a place to happen in some horses. And in an insulin resistant horse, you really got to watch it. But
if I could put a pin in that because this is one of those things I want to emphasize every time I have the opportunity. When you feed your horses fiber, forage, hay, they actually break that down into fat. When you feed fiber, you're giving your horse fat. And to me, that is an extremely counterintuitive thought, but the way the horse's digestive system works, that's actually what's going on. So I just want to point that out to everybody, because we also have this high fat thing going on right now. And I don't think people realize that fat to a horse doesn't necessarily look like what you think it looks like. So didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there.
No, the fermentation that goes on in the horse's cecum is that's where the magic happens. And that's where we take fiber and turn it into volatile fatty acids. And then those are then broken down. And it's, people also say when you're talking about feeding seeds or oils to a horse, well, horses don't eat oils or fats in the natural world. Well, sure they do. It's in the grass, it's in the hay, but it's not like bacon or, butter. But fat is a really interesting ingredient in the equine diet. And humans and horses we don't metabolize fiber hardly at all. The way horses do. Fiber needs to be fermented by the bacteria in the gut. And humans kind of gave up on that a couple 100,000 years ago, back in the woolly mammoth times. But it is again, we kind of going back to that anthropomorphizing that we often do with human to horse equivalencies that may not exist. So yeah, you pull on one part of the horse's diet and you find it's connected to a lot of other things. I do think we're really fortunate that there are so many well-researched, high-quality products available. And the flip side of that coin is there's a lot of not researched, not high-quality products that are available that really do a lot to confuse the horse owner and the consumer.
I guess we're going to stay on nutrition for a little while here. I got a lot of notes and things to jump out into. So biotin would be one of those. I can remember there was a time when if anybody was feeding their horse a supplement, that supplement was going to be biotin. And then you learn things like how horses make their own biotin and they don't really need us to give them more of it and so forth. So that's one of my deals. I feel like in 99% of the cases, you just made expensive urine and didn't do a whole lot of good with it. Would you agree with that? Or there are some other supplements like that where if we only knew a little more, we wouldn't think much of this one, or what?
Well, the B vitamin issue in the horse is, yes, they do synthesize most of the B vitamins they need in the gut if their gut ecosystem is healthy. If they've got an issue with their gut where that bacteria that does the job of synthesizing B vitamins is a lower population, challenged by the bad bacteria in the gut, they may get a little bit of a B vitamin deficiency, but it's pretty rare. The one B vitamin that some studies have said that isn't as well synthesized is biotin. And biotin is really helpful for hoof and hair and coat quality. But the funny thing about just feeding biotin in a supplement is it's kind of like I joked earlier with turmeric. Turmeric needs fat and black pepper to make it release the humaricin. I forget the name of the compound, which works in people, or so people think. But biotin would do a whole lot better if there was some methionine in there, which is an amino acid, and a little zinc and copper. So when people say, they go to the feed store, they say, hey, I need a hoof supplement because my farrier told me, his hoof quality is a little rough here. What people fail to realize is that the biotin and the zinc and the copper and the methionine in that hoof supplement are not magically programmed to only go to the hoof. We haven't figured that part out yet. I mean, yeah, we can have a vet come and inject a joint and go right into that spot with something, but we don't have a hoof supplement that only goes to the hoof. It goes everywhere in the horse. And quite often when you just balance the horse's basic nutritional needs, their coat looks better, their hoof quality improves because you're getting to that deficiency of, typically it's copper and zinc, and then a couple of amino acids. And biotin in the Legacy group, the kind of conclusion that we've reached is a little biotin supplementation is fine. You don't need a lot of it, about 20 milligrams a day. And that would be like a high-end therapeutic dose where we're really trying to create a better hoof or coat quality. But out of all the B vitamins, there's other B vitamin products out there, and they're not necessary. But I'm not opposed to a little biotin in there occasionally, especially if they've got hoof and coat issues. But with B vitamins, they've got all those B vitamins have pretty long, fancy scientific names, and some companies like to list all that on the label and show you how much B1, B2, B3, B6, B9, whatever is in there, thiamine, cobalamin, all that stuff. And it makes you think when you're spending $100 or more on this bucket of powder, oh, it must be really good. It's got all this great stuff in there. Well, it's got great stuff that the horse is already making and it isn't deficient in. And we call that label dressing. And it's the same thing with amino acids. There's 9 essential amino acids and there's 9 or so non-essential amino acids. And in nutrition, essential means you have to eat it in order to get it into your body. And non-essential means your body can take essential amino acids and rearrange them into the non-essentials. Well, there's some companies out there that list all 9 non-essential amino acids on the label. We don't care. It's covered. It just looks, they're using up some ink and some label space there. And in the essential amino acids, we're really looking at lysine, methionine, and threonine as the main ones we need to check up on. And again, in a performance horse, you might be looking at supplementing some amino acids, but in your average recreational retired horse, something like that, they're probably getting it just fine from their forage. So again, it's kind of that focus first on, so you started off by saying, hay, water, salt, that's our foundation. And then we look to see where the gaps in the hay diet are. And then we can say add a vitamin mineral supplement, which there can be everything from super bare bones, no bells and whistles ones out there to the kitchen sink and dialing it into the right one. But in the last few years, what's come about a little bit more is a category of feeds called a ration balancer. And this kind of came out of when you started talking to people about how they fed their horse. They'd say, well, he gets a scoop a senior. Okay, well, how much is a scoop? Because we've got everything from 1 ounce scoops to 3 pound scoops in the barn. One of my favorite scoops that I use in there is a 20 ounce Starbucks cup that I had in the truck, and I scooped some pellets with that and I put it on my little kitchen scale. And it's like, that's a pound. I want a pound of these pellets. So my venti Starbucks cup is now my 1 pound measure for that thing there. But when people said I feed a scoop, then we go and weigh the scoop and find out, well, that's 2.5 pounds. And we go and look at the label on the feed bag and it says you should be feeding 5 pounds of this feed a day to your horse to hit the guaranteed analysis of what vitamins and minerals it says is there. Well, simple cowboy math says if you're feeding 2.5 pounds of a feed that's supposed to be fed at 5 pounds a day, you're at 50% of the nutrition. So the ration balancers basically were developed with kind of a lower calorie, more concentrated, the smaller the serving size, the higher the concentration of some of these things. So now we've got ration balances that are fed in like a 1 pound rate. And you'll see 30% protein on this, and people freak out. That's a lot of what you got ground beef in there. But no, the ration balancer is fed at 1 pound. And that is trying to cover all the bases for the horse in as small a serving size as possible. And going down from there, you get into the powders that are in the bucket that are a 1 or a 2 ounce scoop. That's even more concentrated. And if you have a real easy keeping horse that you're concerned about putting weight on, those are better choices. Probably a lot of the horses that I work with do just fine on a ration balancing feed. If they're a harder keeper and they need more calories, then we can start to look at some of these other performance feeds or senior feeds that have more calories for them to fulfill their energy requirements and keep the weight and condition on. So it's really helping people understand the progression from a vitamin mineral supplement to a ration balancer to a performance or a senior feed or a complete feed. We may have a horse that's got a dental condition where they can't chew hay anymore. Well, that horse has got to eat nothing but feed out of a bag now, and making sure that he's getting the right balanced nutrition for that is really teasing out those little details of their workload, their age, their history, their any medical or joint issues, things like that, and picking the right products that go along with it.
So, and I don't mean to saddle you with this whole thing, but this is an honest question I've got regarding nutrition. The theoretical answer that any nutritionist or feed salesman or sales rep I've ever known from every feed company I've ever known is that there's no such thing as a hot feed, that horses don't really, like, tend to worry about proteins, and a 14% protein will be a hotter feed. And they're going to tell you that horses don't use protein for energy. And once you max out glycogen, there's no studies that would correlate a change in mood to a change in starch or anything like that. And yet, I can tell you from practical experience, there definitely are some hot feeds. You feed this particular horse this feed and you keep him in the stall, and he's going to buck you off on Monday morning because he just feels so damn good. He just got to go play. And if you have him on this other feed, you will not have the same experience with that horse. And so in your experience, what's going on there? Like, I know science tells us there's nothing here we can report yet, but I also know that's bullshit. There is definitely something that's going on there. We just don't know the mechanism. What do you think?
Well, you've certainly been in a barn where folks board their horses, they got them in training, and that horse gets the same feed on down the line. There's a barn grain that they feed. And like you said, first horse here, fine, no problem. Second horse, it's like you gave him rocket fuel and he's ready to go rodeo on you. To me, it comes down to the gut and the gut health. So when you've got a horse's gut that can metabolize the different ingredients in there, whether it's protein or starch or sugar, that's kind of the great equalizer in getting it. So if you're feeding 10 horses, you're not getting 10 different responses out of it. Like we hear people say, oh, alfalfa makes horses hot. Well, not all of them. Not all horses. I've got friends who feed their horses straight alfalfa all day long, and they're not hot. They can step it up when they need to, but they're not crackheads out there, fire breathing dragons. Why? Because their gut has adapted to that diet and is able to metabolize that. So I think a lot of this comes back to, again, no gut, no horse. If you've got a really good, healthy, well-functioning cecum in a horse, you're going to get very different results than a horse that's out of balance back there and having other issues. And you might see that, again, that fecal water syndrome, or maybe these mild recurring colics. And once you get their gut dialed in, a lot of that, the hot horse, the colicking horse, the fecal water horse, it all resolves itself. So that's kind of my fallback is let's make sure they've got a good gut population of bacteria and other microbes, working hard to keep them healthy. And there's so much more research into, they're calling it the gut-brain axis, and the how the gut is so tied to the immune system. And a healthy horse is not just a healthy gut; it's a whole horse that's healthy. Or that little wrinkle of skin behind their elbow, that's healthy too. We got to really start with the gut. And I think sometimes in the feed and supplement world, people get a little carried away, and it's just confusing down there. All this stuff they got to sort through. So again, less is more, simple is better. And so if I've got a client who comes in and says, my horse gets real hot on this hay or that, I'm going to say, well, are we feeding them the right amount? Is it the right choice for them? I had a client down at the Empty Saddle Club a little while ago. She's got this nice little 2-year-old, and she had a high starch, high sugar feed in there that was a performance feed for when they're starting these young horses. And he was a reiner, he's putting in his work. And that was an appropriate feed when he was in training like that. And he's burning up that starch and sugar. But now that things have stepped down a couple of notches, and he's with an owner who's just kind of doing some once a month rein cow horse shows, it's not as demanding. Well, we can switch them to a feed that's not as high starch and sugar. And maybe by switching them to that lower sugar starch feed now, we're going to prevent that insulin resistance and potential laminitis later on down the road. But feeding them appropriately for their workload and their job is one of the other challenges we've got to talk to with the owner.
You find a couple of things here. One, in your experience, what percentage of horse owners or people who are responsible for feeding horses are actually weighing the feed to know that they're giving this horse 5 pounds and not just an arbitrary scoop and a half, whatever the hell that winds out to be? You think most people are weighing, or the hay for that matter? That horse ate 15 pounds of forage today. I don't say that because it was 2 flakes and I assume. I say that because I put it in a bucket on a scale and I know it was 15 pounds.
Yeah.
Who's doing that? Anybody?
I went to this great outfit, a therapeutic riding center in Bakersfield a little while ago, and they're weighing out all their hay, and they're putting it in hay nets, and they're measuring out real specific amounts. And I was like, that just warms my heart. I love to see that. How did you come up with how much to feed him? And the person was like, I don't know. I was like, okay, so you're weighing your hay, but we have a number there. And I helped them, and they were right on. I don't know. Maybe that person just didn't know, and I was amused by the fact that they're meticulously weighing out the hay, and they're like, I don't know how much. It's 5 pounds. Well, how come the pony gets 5 pounds and the draft gets 5 pounds? Fortunately, it wasn't the case in there. And they actually had a really pretty straightforward feed program going, but it's not as common as we'd like it to be. And then there's also my dad. When I was growing up, my dad was a mentor for me, and did a lot of construction projects together. And he had Friday's rules for accuracy, which were measure it with a micrometer, mark it with chalk, and cut it with a chainsaw. And horse people are exactly like this. We want parts per million and grams and milligrams on the label, and then we go to relying on the 2 most arbitrary and random units of measurement, the flake and the scoop. So we Excel spreadsheet this thing to death, and we get it down to the milligrams, and then the guy who's feeding is just throwing 2 flakes a day or 2 flakes a meal. So getting people to understand. I did work at one ranch where every single horse, they've got it charted out in there based on their weight and activity level, how many pounds of hay per meal that horse gets. And at first, the crew there was ready to mutiny, and the owner said, "Give me a month on this, and I'll prove my point." I think she said her hay costs went down about 40% because they weren't overfeeding horses. Their body condition on all these horses improved, and she said, we decided that we're going to take that time and that energy and that effort to dial that in, and then each individual owner does what they are going to do in terms of a bucket, adding that in. But it is pretty important, especially when you're looking at, like we said earlier, a scoop can be anywhere from an ounce to 3 pounds, and you could be way over or way under feeding. And pretty much with all the nutrition programs I do for people, I can honestly say I've saved people money by getting them a $20 kitchen scale and a $10 hanging fish scale that they weigh the hay out by. A little story about my own horses. We moved from a place where I was doing all the care. I was weighing out their feed, and then we go to a place where the crew is feeding them, and they were throwing them 2 flakes of alfalfa in the morning and 2 flakes of alfalfa in the evening. Well, I pulled that meal out, and those flakes were 7 pounds. They were dense flakes of alfalfa. And I've got 2 pretty much retired, easy keeping quarter horses here who were loving it because they were eating 28 pounds of hay a day. Prior to that, I was feeding them 15 pounds of hay a day plus their bucket. So I said to the ranch manager, I was like, if we feed them just 1 flake a day, 1 flake in the morning, 1 flake in the evening, it'll be coming up a little light, but I'll make up the difference. And she said, well, you don't get a discount by feeding them half as much. And I was like, I get it. But they were getting the discount. They were saving that money. So eventually, because I couldn't get a reliable weight of hay that I wanted to feed my horses, the base feed at the ranch was cubes. And I can put a bucket out that holds 8 pounds of cubes, and that's what they get in the morning and in the evening. And a lot of people have problems with cubes. They're like, they're crappy quality. There's stuff inside of them. They're hard on their teeth that makes them choke. And some or all of that may have some validity, but for now, my horses and a lot of these other horses at the ranch are doing good on them. And it gives me the portion control I'm looking for. And then to kind of throw that whole weigh in your hay thing on its ear is, what if you just got free choice hay out there in front of your horse all day long? Are they maintaining condition, gaining or losing weight? Are you exercising them enough to be free fed? And some horses will eventually self-regulate and eat the proper amount and maintain condition without getting overweight. So I have a lot of clients who, like, first rule in my feed program is it has to be 24/7 access to hay for my horse. I was like, okay, we can work with that. And now we're going to, figure out if the only thing we can do there in terms of energy input and output is changing the exercise levels. So my retired horses, if they had free access to feed, they're not energized, or they're not burning up that energy, so they're going to get fat. Or as we like to say, they're not fat, they're just easier to find. You have to balance the energy input to the energy output. So that's all the conversation we have with the owners about that is, they might not have the choice in their barn of as much choice as how and what their horse is fed. And we got to work with what's in front of us.
You brought up a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. And I think if anybody were to show up at a horse show or some kind of an event and they unloaded a body condition score 3 out of the trailer, they would be in danger of having the cops called on them or something like that. But you could go to any horse show you want to, and you're going to see a bunch of body condition score 8s walking around, which is just as far from what we want as a 3, and nobody would blink an eye. And a lot of people would even say that's the prettiest, healthiest horse there. So what do you think about that? Do you see an epidemic of obese horses out there?
Yes, sir. We do. We see a lot of overfed horses. And again, part of that comes from, there's different disciplines that want, they want that fluffier horse. They want that well-padded horse there. And yeah, BC body condition of 7 or even 8, you're teetering on the edge of a medical emergency there. They get much heavier. You're definitely looking at the insulin resistance possibility, the laminitis, all those things. And just the strain on their joints too. You got another 200 pounds on a horse. That's 200 pounds of strain on that fetlock or stifle. So yeah, we see a lot of that. And it comes I think part of it comes from food is love in a lot of people's minds. And they think feeding their horses extra means they love them more. I'm not going to say they love them less, but they could find other ways to show their love for their horse than overfeeding them. And again, I joke, but if you save $100 on your weekly feed bill, that's $100 you could be spending on body work with me, because that's a great way to show your horse how much you love them, is by giving them some body work and letting them feel good in their body, not just feeling bloated and stuffed. But yeah, overweight horses are it's a thing, and it's just as sad to me as the body condition of 3 that you might see out there. Yeah.
So let's
Actually,
bring that all full circle and tie in. Go ahead.
Well, I was just
What
going
were
to
you
say,
gonna say?
one of my mentors, Katie Young, when we talked to her about, nutrition topics, she always signs off her chat with, "All right, now go ride your fat horse," because she sees so many overweight horses in her line of work. Go ride your horse. They need to exercise.
I like that. That's very good. So we talked a lot about nutrition there, or we really a little about nutrition, but we got into arthritis and fat horses and insulin resistance. So why don't we bring that kind of full circle back to some body work and how those things combine for you in your world. So I guess first of all, when we talked about gut health and the horse, that really is where it all starts. Are there certain things, like you walk into a barn for the first time, you're laying eyes on these horses for the first time from a body worker and nutritional standpoint, you look at that horse and you see this, I'm looking for these things, and that tells me we have trouble here. You got any tips for us like that?
Well, the one gut health issue that is really prevalent, and there's some body signs of it being a possibility, is ulcers. And have to be real careful in the body work and nutrition side of this to be clear with the horse owners and the trainers. I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not diagnosing your horse. And a lot of times what I would say is, given the way the horse is doing these things, that might be something to discuss. That's something I would discuss with your vet and ask them about ulcers, because a lot of times, you hear somebody say, well, they're really cinchy, they're sensitive around the girth. Well, that could be that they were just girthed up too tight, cinched up too tight and rough, and they just don't like it. Or it could be something else going on underneath there. Real skin sensitivity, like a horse with severe ulcers, they're just like, don't touch me. That does not feel good. So when you see a horse that's on guard like that and guarding certain areas of their bodies, the stifles, you ever have a horse where you just go back and you just get anywhere near their stifle and they start kicking out? That's kind of an interesting sign that there's maybe some lumbar sacral or SI pain going on there. So there are some little giveaways like that you start to see and start to think, do we need to call in the vet, or is this a farrier issue or a training issue and a nutritional issue, and really start to pull everybody together to put their heads and their experience together and say, what's going on with this guy? And, when we're working with that top end horse, these pre-St. George Grand Prix level dressage horses, you're talking about 1 to 2% difference in performance is huge. And so they're polishing up that last 1 to 2% on this horse that most people would look at it and go, that's an example of equine perfection right there. And they're still wanting to tease that 1% out that's not quite right there. So yeah, we do see those body signs in there, and I'm able to say, next time you have the vet out, maybe ask them about this. And sometimes it's something as simple as, when were their teeth checked last? And how are their teeth doing? And I think there's better awareness now about teeth. It's not just once a year or, a set schedule. It's as needed, and it could be more than once a year. It could be once every couple of years. It just depends. And to kind of get out of that scheduled mindset and look in the horse's mouth a little deeper. But yeah, there are some of those body signs, behavioral signs that kind of point us in different directions to have a conversation with the owner that then may lead to a conversation with the veterinarian.
What about some other patterns in there? So like you mentioned postural components earlier, and we would certainly have certain disciplines that would tend to ride a horse this way versus that way. Maybe we're more into collection, or maybe we're in a discipline that heavily rewards false collection. And so we have a horse in kind of a contorted frame there. Are there some patterns there? Like I'm coming to work on this barn of Grand Prix level dressage horses. I bet they're all going to be sore here. Or I'm working on the working equitation horses, and I need to really be investigating this area because they have tendencies to have problems here, and so forth. Where do you commonly see these patterns and these issues in horses?
Well, Jim actually did a really nice job in the book Beyond Horse Massage. There's a brief chapter in the back that just kind of goes down through the various disciplines, and so in a barrel racer, if their first turn is to the left, you're going to see them putting a lot of impact on this. In a jumper where they go over the jump and land, and they're always landing on a certain leg, you're going to see that shoulder. A racehorse coming out of the gate, you're going to see this. Team ropers, they catch and they dally, and the horse gets that jolt to the saddle horn and the withers. There's a tendency for them to show that up in the withers and the shoulder. But there's no kind of, that's the other beauty of the Masterson method is it's not they're out at the pole, they're out at the withers, they're out at the hip. So fix, and on to the next one. It's the whole horse going through that. And it's really surprising sometimes, a trainer will say, yeah, they've got this issue with their pole, and, we've palpated all through there and we just can't figure it out. And, one of Jim's sayings is it all ends up in the pole. So I had a horse a while back. It was a high level horse, and it had this habit of kind of biting down on the left side and pushing that cheek up and out. And they could have sworn it was a TMJ or a pole issue. And we palpated all through there, and there's just no response at all in there. But I got back and was basically kind of air gap over that lumbar sacral area. And the horse started doing that bite down with the left and drive that cheek to the sky. And the trainer was like, I've never seen anything like that in my life. And I was like, I wouldn't have either if I had been tunnel vision focused on the pole and found out that the real source of that tension that's making that horse do that maneuver is back in his lumbar sacral area. And so like horses are great at transferring tension from one part of their body to the other, and it's hardly ever just one thing, and the compensatory challenges that they create for themselves by being sore on the left hind, well, that's going to show up in the right front in those tension patterns. So I really appreciate how Jim is not only required us to look at the whole horse and not, come in with blinders on that say it's right here in the scapula and that's all I'm going to work on. And sometimes people are surprised at how long we spend with a horse compared to some of the other modalities. Is we're there for an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. It's basically until the horse says I'm done, and they will tell you that you're communicating with the horse muscles and fascia and their nervous system as well. And at some point they do just go, okay, I gotta go sit down. I gotta go hang out in the stall for a while because my nervous system is getting full. But there are typical patterns. We see a lot of lumbar sacral strain in that lesson horse that's been, being jumped by a bunch of amateurs all day long. And God bless the school horse. The school horse and the therapeutic riding horse, I think, are two of the hardest working animals in the equine industry. And quite often that lesson program or that therapeutic riding center, their budget is tight and they don't have the ability to do body work on the horses. But, if they did that, I've got a few lesson barns that it's just so rewarding because they say, look, you keep these guys tuned up and running and able to earn their, they gotta earn their keep here, and they're on the payroll, and regular body work can really help keep them going. Unfortunately, some people, I get a lot of calls. It's like, hey, my horse is sore. Can you come out now? And I was like, nah, I'm booked, but I'd be happy to come out in about 2 weeks. But if you kept that horse on a regular maintenance schedule, you wouldn't be having these chronic or these immediate situations come up where you're getting ready to load them into the trailer for a show and they're not happy about it. Well, if we maintain them, you're less likely to have that issue.
So for me, this lends itself really well to a conversation about longevity of these horses and kind of, if we keep the nutrition on track, we're not feeding them really inflammatory diets, we're keeping their body in good check, we're keeping their posture, so we're not putting them in contorted frames or overusing them or anything like that. The hope would be we're going to have a horse that's around for a long, long time and is actually serviceable for the entirety of their life. They don't spend 10 years retired at the end where nothing could be done with them and they're just hanging out. So are there some things that you see that you wish the average horse owner knew? And hey, if y'all would just do this, then you'd have a whole lot better success and things would go longer and so forth. So like maybe carrot stretches or any kind of thing like that comes to mind for you, or hey, if y'all would just do this.
Well, we're fortunate now with the improvements in nutrition and vet care and training and husbandry overall. We get horses living into their 30s, that's a ripe old age. And we this horse program I worked with, they had the school horses were from a pack outfit in the Sierra, so the horses would be up in the mountains taking tourists up into the high country from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and then they'd be down there at the school through the fall and winter months. And those horses were all in their mid to late 20s, and they were like old Dodge trucks. They just kept going, and they were durable. Well, what was the secret to their longevity is like all the things we talked about before: free access to forage, in a big herd with their friends, good exercise, good environment, good farrier care, good vet care. It's incredible how they can live, but I think that the catching things early and knowing when to back off a little bit in the competitive world, there's schedules and there's goals and there's we got to get to the finals and we got to qualify, and it's really hard to pull back and say not now, this isn't the right time for this horse. That's probably the biggest thing. I think we've seen some really nice examples at some high level competitions where somebody was in the running to win and they said, we're scratching because it's just not the right time for this horse. I think that the most important thing is keeping that horse moving. They're made to move, and the more outside time they have, outside of the arena time they have, trail time, just long, slow distance time is a real key to longevity. There was a clinic I went to years ago with Charles de Kunfe, a European dressage master, and if you've ever seen him or met him, he's brilliant and a lovely person and dapper. He's got his tailored suit and his ascot, and he says, "You Americans turn your horses into hothouse flowers. They go from the stall to the arena and back to the stall again, and that's their life. And they do beautifully at that, but are they happy and functional and thriving?" He says, "How about a little trail ride for your Grand Prix dressage horse?" And most Americans, if you say take your Grand Prix horse on a trail ride, they'd gasp in horror. But let them smell the flowers, let them stretch their legs, let them go places and see new things. And I think that's, the longevity are those horses that are cross-trained and they've got a variety of experiences to them as well, rather than just stall to the arena, to the stall, to the trailer, to the show and back again. So movement and variety, I think, are really vital to the horses. I was really fortunate to work for a trainer at Santa Anita early on in my bodywork career. And the family was based up in Sanger, California, and they had hundreds of acres of Kings River bottomland, so they had green pasture year round. which is really rare in California. I'm here in upstate New York now looking at all this green grass, and in doing a nutrition program, the most challenging thing for me is to factor in pasture grass that the horses are eating, because we just don't see it in California. But back to Kenny and those horses, when all those horses were breaking down at Santa Anita and it was a real bad go there, I said to Ken, I don't remember us having horses break down, and I've worked for you for like 5 years. He said, we haven't had any. And I was like, well, why is that? And he's like, we send them back to the farm when they have the slightest thing going wrong with them, and they get the vet care they need, and they get time off, and they get to be out on a pasture. And they would retire horses from their racing stable at age 8, 10 years old, sound and in the money, and they would transition into being somebody's dressage or trail horse, and they got another 20 years in them, and they're not all broken down, because they were really good about saying, let's take the long, slow approach here rather than the fast, quick.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think longevity and long, slow distance is always a really good thing for them.
I think that deal that you're talking about of the perfectly bedded stall and then the perfectly flat arena, that's really one of the worst things you can do for a horse. The more you can turn them out in rough country and they have to go up and down and their hooves are exposed to soft and hard, and they have to stay in a dynamic environment, that really is where they thrive. When we try to put them in that padded rubber room, it's harmful. It really, I know it's always people trying to do the best for their horse in air quotes, but what we think is the best for our horse is often certainly not, and that whole, oh my gosh, he could get scratched, another horse could kick him. Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's the environment he's designed to be in. That's where he's going to do best. And yeah.
Well, I do have, that performance horse that is in some of the cleanliness of some of the shavings and some of the stalls for the clients that I have. They probably spend more on shavings than they do on hay. It's incredible. But what I say to them is, your horse's feet are getting kind of dumb because there's no challenge to their proprioception. They go from a flat stall to a flat arena. And it's like, and then what happens when horses start to do that? Well, we got to put poles down on the ground in the arena. We got to do some cavaletti work, because they're just clunking along, not having to think about where their feet are. So it's exactly like you said, a little rocky terrain's it's a good thing for them. A little varied terrain, make them have to think about that, and recondition that proprioception. If you've got a jumper who's going over and their feet are kind of dumb and they don't care where their legs are, well, they're going to be knocking rails off. Or a dressage horse that's going to be stepping wrong, and the judge is going to take points off for that. They need that terrain and variety. You and I are 100% agreement on that. Is terrain and condition variety is essential for them. They're made to move. Personally, to me, I travel around to a lot of barns, and it's heartbreaking to see a warm blood in a 12x12 box stall. Personally, there's a ranch out that it's a boarding facility in Southern California, and they have 24x24 stalls for everybody. And the horses can see other horses, and they can see to the horizon. And it's open and airy, and that's kind of my personal minimum for a horse. I'd like to see them, definitely have air, be able to see, and that, if you go to the show and you got to be in a 12x12 for the weekend or the week, they'll be all right. But when they're at home, as much turnout, movement, and seeing to the horizon. I had a client who's like, we just kind of peeled this away. Her horse is one of the mouthiest horses I've ever worked on. He actually bit me hard for the first time the other day, and I've been working for him for months, and we were teasing out, what is the root of this behavior? And she finally told me that, hey, well, the breeder and trainer for this horse, she believes in raising all of her horses in 12x12 box stalls, all these colts that are in there. And it is kind of bubble wrapping them to protect these high-end horses. And I said, that's why he's a biter like this. And he never learned how to express himself in a socially acceptable manner. And to me, what that horse needed was to be turned out in a pasture with a bunch of geldings, a bunch of yearlings, and they bump into each other and they bite each other and they kick each other. And even better, if you put an old mare in there and the old mare's the one telling them that's not how we do things around here. So they kind of need somebody to kick their ass a little bit when they're young and show them the rules and let them learn how to express themselves, and through movement mostly. But that early environment, that starting, I mean, you've started bunches of horses over your career. That initial impression is so important, and that sets up a pattern of behaviors for them for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. When it comes to the feral or spoiled question, most of the trainers, not all, there are a couple of notable exceptions, but most of them always pick the feral horse. And I think one of the reasons is because the feral horse is a horse, and we're horse trainers and we're used to dealing with horses. If you get that kind of raised in someone's backyard colt that was never turned out with a herd of horses and all, they don't know how to be a horse. And now I have an individual I really have to figure out, because none of the normal rules apply because it never learned how to be a horse. And so, you've skewed that animal's future way more than you think you have when like you're talking about the breeder raising babies in stalls. I mean, that just makes me cringe. Like there's almost nothing worse you could do for a bunch of babies than raising them that way. We wouldn't raise human kids like that. Like, they need peer groups, they need to play with kids their age, they need to get out on the monkey bars and fall off and get the wind knocked out of them and skin their knee and chase each other around. And I mean, that is necessary for development. It absolutely is. Which means you're going to skin a knee. You're going to, a little something's going to happen. They're going to get a little hide knocked off, but it's okay. That's what they need. Let's talk, we'll twist it a little bit, and we're a little bit on the mental behavioral side right now. And I wanted to bring about the topic of connection. This is kind of a drum I beat on a lot, because I feel like what a lot of us want in the horse world right now is that connection with our horse. And I think, kind of like we've just talked about with the nurture nature of raising that colt, the way we tend to go about that connection is very, very flawed. The last podcast that I released was with Patrick King, and we kind of talked about whether or not it was a requirement to be a friend with a horse in order to get them trained. And Patrick was kind of on the side of, I want to be friends with all of my horses. And I have some pretty notable exceptions to that. Horses that I trained that won a lot of money and were very, very successful, but they were kind of a bitch. Like, nobody liked them. Personally, this was not a horse I wanted to hang around with after work. It was a horse we got our job done, but their personality was not such. And the flip side of that is I've seen a lot of people with a very friendly relationship with their horse, but when it comes time to actually get something done with that animal, they have no so the being friends with the horse is not the magic sauce that makes everything work and develops that connection. One of the things that kind of drew me to Jim the first time I saw him work a horse was that it was very evident that he was able to develop that working rapport with that horse very, very quickly. I mean, they're handing him a horse he's never seen before, never touched. And in 3 minutes, he's got the lead rope dropped on the ground. They're in this big indoor arena. The horse is stuck right there beside him, happy to have him poke and prod and do all these things to it. So what part of that, what do you think is the magic sauce that develops that rapport with the horse, that connection where you can go in there to a horse you've never met, and minutes later, that horse will choose you over the handlers that it's had every day in the barn? What do you think is the magic sauce there?
Well, I think when we come in as a body worker into the stall, we're very different than everybody else who's handling that horse, in that our goal is very different. Our agenda is to help the horse relax, whereas pretty much everybody else's goal is to get that horse to do things that I want to do. And I think that the way we come into there is, I had a barn early on in my training where there were some mouthy, pushy, aggressive horses. And I kind of looked around and I was trying to be a detective on how did it get to this point. And it was a busy barn. There was a lot of activity. They were, grooming, saddling them up, getting them in the arena, warming them up. It was just a constant flurry of activity. And everybody had an agenda with the horse to, whereas my agenda to come in is like, hey, bro, let's just chill out and hang out for a while here. And I don't expect anything from you except blinking and licking and chewing and yawning. That's all I want you to do right now. And I think once they realize that they feel that in just us doing the bladder meridian or some TMJ release, oh, this guy's got a different program here. And I joke sometimes with people, is like, a lot of people's relationship with their horse is, I'm here to hassle you for about an hour. And when we come in and, I'm going to make you get the turn on the forehand today, come hell or high water. And that energy of agenda driven time with your horse, I mean, if you don't think they pick up on that, then maybe you should take up bowling, because the horses pick up on so much more energetically than we can even imagine. It's another one of those things about that question of, if I could understand what's going on in the horse's brain, that's it. But I think the intention of coming in here and saying, I'm here to help is a real game changer. And I'm not in a hurry, and I'm basically, because Jim's principle is stay below the bracing response. Don't push them into that fight or flight state with the body work, which there are some kinds of body work that absolutely do that. You push too hard, they want to leave. And that less is more approach is, I think it's more horse-like than human-like. And I think the more horse-like we are, the more our horses are going to like us. And what's the key to making your horse like you is that you're more like a horse to them than a predator who's agenda driven and, coming in with that energy. So that's where, Jim Masterson says his life goal is that every horse in the world experiences the bladder meridian. And I tell my clients that I show the bladder meridian to, it will change your relationship with your horse. If you just spend 10 minutes once a week barely touching your horse, and they say, you're crazy. It's not, what difference is that going to make? Hey, what's the harm in trying it for a month and see what happens? And the people who do it, and unfortunately not everybody does. For some reason they think, well, I can't do it, or I don't have the time for it, or whatever. But the ones that do, they come back and go, it makes a difference that you slow down and do less and follow the responses of the horse. Because it's almost like being in a conversation with someone that interrupts you. It's like, well, are you really listening to me? And I think a lot of times the thing that interrupts you getting closer to understanding your horse is if you ask them a question and they're answering you, and you interrupt them and ask them another question. And we see that all the time. You gave the horse a cue to maybe move over to the right, and they did that. And instead of releasing and rewarding and acknowledging that, you're just on to the next thing. And they're like, well, okay, he doesn't care what answer I give him. I'll just do what I think I'm supposed to do. So again, I think, that's how Masterson Method has really influenced me overall in the horsemanship side of things, is really, are you really paying attention to your horse? Are you really following their responses? Because if you're not, what's the point of asking the question if you're just going to be like on to the next thing? So I think that's a big difference, that incorporating a little bit of body work from the owner or the trainer, or having regular body work come in. Because I do get people to say, be careful with that one. He kicks and he bites. He's not a happy horse. And you spend 5 or 10 minutes giving them some bladder meridian or some TMJ release, and the trainer will come back and it's like, I can't believe you're, still alive. Thanks for telling me that before I put me in the stall with them. But yeah, I think people like, I also joke at home is, I have 2 horses, and at the end of the ride, as I'm taking the saddle off and brushing them down, I'd like my horses, the look in his eye to be, yeah, I'd do that again, instead of, yeah, maybe you should ride the mare tomorrow, you know. And the old saying of, this horse meets you at the gate, that means a lot to me. Like if I show up there and it's not just because he wants to be fed, but that he shows up and he's like looking forward to hanging out with me, even if I'm just going to pick his feet and brush his tail, he's looking forward to me being around. I think that's just a factor of spending enough horse time with him, not human time. So
it is. I'm not one that tries to throw all the horse trainers under the bus or anything like that. I think I know being a horse trainer is a hard life, and I think most of them are good, decent, hardworking people and everything. But I will say I am continually amazed at some of the things that some of the horse trainers haven't figured out, haven't been around horses that many hours a day for that many years, and then we consistently have a barn full of sour horses. Like, I wouldn't want to get up in the morning and go deal with a dozen sour horses. I want to figure out how the hell to not, let's not have that problem. Let's have a bunch of horses that are happy to be here too, and anyway, I guess you get used to what you get used to, and that's unfortunate. But
and the positive flip side to that is if we can come into a barn and say, hey, we changed something nutritionally for these horses and now they're feeling better, or we did some body work for them and now they're feeling better. You don't have that 12 sour horses to come and work with. And the trainers that kind of can expand their understanding to that, and I'm here to make their job easier. I don't want them to be riding a horse that doesn't want to pick up that left canter lead because they're sore all the time, because then they're like, okay, well, I got to get this left lead, and they do all the things that they know how to do, but because they've got time and financial pressures on them to get that horse ready for the next level. It's kind of, time is so different for horses than it is for humans, and horses have I don't know if they have any concept of money and prizes and winning. It's like, do they see that blue ribbon and go, yes, I got it, that's all me? I think that slowing down and is really helpful for troubled horses, and slowing down it just costs too much money in a training situation sometimes, and they may not have the ability to do that because, again, schedules and goals and stuff like that.
The origination of that was Jim's method, staying underneath the bracing response of the horse. And to me, that very much, I think it's why Jim and I kind of were drawn to one another, because the stuff that I teach with the bits and all is very much the same way. If you pick up the bridle reins and you immediately cause tension to radiate throughout your horse, you did not just help anything, right? We didn't improve. Right. We literally shut his brain off for learning. Everything now is going to take longer and be harder and be more of a pain in the ass because nobody's happy about it. If you just learn to handle the reins in a manner where you don't cause the horse to brace up, everything gets better and smoother and everybody's happier. And sure. I'm also the same guy that just said, I don't care if I'm friends with a horse or not, but that's not the same thing as being offensive to every horse you come across. I see a definite difference right there. I think now we've talked about connection a little bit and reading the body language and all. I think that leads us very well into discussing the equine empowered training that you have done with veterans and Mustangs. So would you go into that a little bit for us, kind of give us an overview of what that is?
Yeah, this it started about 7 or so years ago, and I was an assistant on a 2-day weekend seminar, and this was in California, and Jim was actually teaching that course. I don't know if you know, a while back, Jim's mom lived in Huntington Beach, and he would come to California to visit and teach courses. And I was so fortunate during that time that he was in California so much, so I got to assist him on a lot of courses. But we had this one guy on the course that didn't fit the usual demographic. And I'll describe him in 3 words, and you'll have a pretty accurate picture of him. Tan Wrangler jeans.
Okay.
The cowboy that wears the tan Wranglers. You know who I'm talking about. little crusty, little old school. We had this crusty old school horseman on this class, and he went through the course, and he had his niece with him, and then he came back and did the 5-day course, and he was a great guy. He was a construction guy, big, he's a big deal, and he's a lifetime horseman, sheriff's posse rider, just a super guy. His name's Mike. And after that, he came to me and said, I really want to create a program with veterans and horses because I just believe in the things that can be accomplished in putting those two horses and veterans together. And he said, what can we do? And I said, well, as I travel around to barns back then, every single barn asked me, do you know anybody we can hire? We need a ranch hand here. We need somebody. And knowing a little bit about some of the veteran populations, think about it, they've been very well trained to perform a set of skills. They know how to follow directions. They know how to work hard. And a lot of veterans have had some equine supported therapeutic experience with horses as they're exiting the military, and they're just looking for more. So I said, I think we should create a job skills training program where if we have veterans that want to be around horses and want to eventually work in the equine industry, let's just get them the basic horse handling skills to then explore what's available out there. And he said, great, let's run with that. And what we created there was I wanted to shift from other veterans programs that I observed, which are kind of these islands of experience. They take you out for a week and you're a cowboy, and then you come back and you're alone again doing your life without any continuation. So we created this program to meet weekly and teach them basic skills. So the first thing we do is, how do you pick up a halter and a lead rope and go into a horse's stall and halter them up? And, we're dealing with school horses here. We're not going into the pen with wild Mustangs. And we started a progression of skills like that would get these veterans the potential to, maybe they just want to volunteer at a local riding school or therapeutic program. They just want to groom horses. Whatever their goal was, Mike wanted to be able to help support that. And in doing that, we've sent a handful of veterans through the Masterson Method training. We've got a few fully certified Masterson practitioners that went through the program. We sent a couple off to farrier school. We had one woman who noticed the way the horses' manes and tails were braided at a dressage show. And she's like, oh, that's a thing? I was like, girl, that is a thing. And she learned to braid manes and tails. And actually, a braider can make more money at a horse show than a body worker, because body work's not necessarily what you do at the show. Depends, but every horse in that class needs their mane braided a certain way. And so we basically just used all our contacts in the equine industry to help identify where can we send veterans for the next level of training if they want some of them, they have a benefit status and a retirement status that says you cannot work. The VA has got that covered, and you're not supposed to be employed, so you can volunteer. So we could help them get trained up as volunteers. And it's been a wonderful process. It's been really very interesting. We get a wide variety of veterans. Mike has a hard time saying no to anybody, and the Veterans Administration called him, the VA in Long Beach, and they said, can you do a program for the Blind Rehabilitation Center veterans? And Mike said yes. And I said, so we're going to have a bunch of visually impaired people out with the horses? And he's like, yep. And we figured it out. And it's now a lot of these veterans are older, and it is really just it's like a recreational field trip for them when they're at this center and learning how to adapt to their changing vision and all that. And one of the things that was really wonderful about it was the language we use around working with the horse, and how I had to shift that away from a visual focus or visual perspective. So now we're talking about more about hearing and feeling and that sixth sense of space and time around you, which they understand really well, these veterans that are going through vision changes. And it's pretty amazing to get a visually impaired veteran to do the bladder meridian with them, and they'll say, I can hear him licking and chewing, or I can feel a change in them. So that's been one of the other really rewarding programs in that. And then Mike also has a real interest in the Mustangs in the American West. And one of our partners in this outfit, his name's Clay McDermott. He's a fellow up in Twin Oaks, and he's a genuine cowboy. He runs cattle on his land up there, and he trains horses, and he has created a facility there that's exactly suited for Mustangs. And he thinks that the Mustang is, we're all in the same boat where we think that, except for winning the Kentucky Derby, a Mustang can do pretty much anything, any discipline, any event. Two of my clients and dear friends are top working equitation trainers and competitors. They're literally number 1 and 2 in the country. And they got a lot of their early success on Kiger Mustangs from Oregon. And they trained these horses up. So they're basically, pre-St. George level dressage plus all the working equitation. So Mike wants to, part of the other piece of that is we'll get these veterans trained up and then start to involve them at the appropriate level in working with the Mustangs up at the Twin Oaks facility. So it's been very interesting, and kind of finding the fences for that program of when do we get into a therapeutic or a clinical kind of situation with them in terms of mental health, because you can have just folks coming in off the street with no military background, no potential traumatic past or post-traumatic stress or anything like that. And they have emotional responses to being around horses. And it's, I'm always very clear that when I'm working with the veterans is, you've already given and you've already sacrificed, and maybe you've been injured and maybe you've suffered. Not all veterans have. Some veterans have had an amazing military experience, and we're working with them just as much. But I don't ever want to create a situation where that's adding to their stress or trauma. So the Masterson method, by just being this way to slow down and experience the horse, has been really successful in that. So, let's say we teach somebody how to put the halter on for the first time. Well, one of the Masterson techniques that could be really helpful is just that head down, where you gently ask the horse to soften at the pole and drop their head down. Well, if you do that, putting the halter on is a breeze now. Or when we go to teach a veteran about picking up a horse's hoof for the first time in order to clean it, we talk about the shoulder down and back release that you've seen Jim do and seen in the videos and all that. And I think that kinesthetically, and it ingrains that knowledge into the body in a different way that allows people with different learning styles. We have visual learners, we have auditory learners, we have the people who learn by doing. There's all these different learning styles, and I found it really fascinating how using the Masterson method as we're teaching regular everyday horse skills is so effective at incorporating that into their body.
I'm definitely not a practitioner. I haven't gone to any of the trainings or anything like that, but I've observed and watched and been privileged to be a part of a couple of his events and everything. And I definitely have to say, if I have kind of a touchy colt in the round pen or something that's really not comfortable with people, then you just sit there and start playing with the bladder meridian. And if you let him know that you're paying attention to what he's doing and he's responding, you can develop that rapport, and it just opens doors and allows you to progress a whole lot faster. It's just a phenomenal way for true connection with a horse. And I think, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to kind of follow up with that. On that is on my 2-day course with Jim, at the lunch on the second day, he said to the trainer who was hosting the course, he's like, what do you got back there in the barn that could use some help? and this horse brought out, the trainer brought out this Palomino Mustang, he said, this is his third strike. If I've worked with him, I've sent him out for adoption, he's come back, and he just keeps kind of reverting to some of these behaviors that make it challenging for him to be a riding horse. And Jim said, I'll bring him out. And it really showed me that Jim wasn't going to shy away from a challenging horse, and he was there for that horse. And it inspired me in working with the veterans programs is, don't shy away from the challenging ones. Ease into it and go slow and be there. Now, I have no training whatsoever in mental health. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. All I can do is show these folks, these veterans, some horsemanship skills. And if it brings up stuff for them, I can listen, and I can be supportive, and I can make suggestions about, where to go for some support. And it's a tricky thing because, we're here to help horses, and now we're here to help veterans. And but what people come back and say is just so amazing. And like I said, I'm not a therapist, but I had a guy come back and say, I thought about that thing you said about make the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult, the old horse training. And he says, I realized how I was really good at making the right thing difficult and the wrong thing difficult and the wrong thing easy with my kid. And I just shifted that around in my head. And now we've got a different relationship, different communication, different understanding. And for me, that's a home run. And like I said, I'm not a therapist, but if we can just let the horse do that for people, then I'm all in.
I would say here that I do have a decent bit of personal experience with therapeutic riding stuff. I've done some clinics for some of those groups as well. When I was volunteering with it, I was working with autistic kids, was kind of the group that I stayed with for a few years. And you really, if you get involved in that, you're going to see some miraculous stuff. There's just, it's absolutely mind blowing, some of the transformations that take place with some of those kids. I've seen a kid say his first words for the first time. He was a teenager and was autistic, had never spoken, and his first words were to tell the horse to walk on. And I'm getting about teared up right now thinking about it. But so I'm saying all of this just to encourage any of you out there, if you have a heart to do something like that and a little bit of experience with horses, go find a group near you and volunteer with them. They're always, I will say this, they tend to attract people that are there to help the clients, and they tend to always be short on people that have an understanding of horses. And so horse people will be welcomed with open arms into any of those groups, and you will get back from it far more than you put into it. I absolutely guarantee it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen some beautiful changes in people. Again, no clinical therapy being dispensed, just horsemanship. And I had a mother who dropped her daughter off to this basic horse program that I was assisting with, and I had to tell mom, we have this rule that only the students can be over in this area, because she was just a hover mother and trying to do everything for her daughter, which I understand. And I went over to get something from the tack room, and her mother was just champing at the bit over there. And she's like, what is Emily doing? What are you doing over there? And it's like, well, we were just talking about horse stuff. And she's like, well, Emily doesn't talk. I was like, yeah, she does. And mother went into tears. It was beautiful. And she kind of realized I'm overdoing it. I got to let her be. I got to let her figure things out. And I'm getting misty eyed like you were there about that. Yeah, I definitely encourage people to reach out. There's some really wonderful programs and transformations that are happening with horses out there.
Also say, just since I'm trying to plug that industry as much as I can, they are also always looking for horses that are not train wrecks. A lot of the horses they'll have donated have lots of physical problems, and they've got a expensive vet regimen to try to keep that horse in the program. So if you have a horse that is gentle and kind and healthy, and you're not doing something with it, that would be a good thing to do with that horse for a year or two, and bring a lot of good into the world through that. So
when I did my 5-day course with Jim, we were up in the Palo Alto, Stanford area, and a couple of days of it were actually at the Stanford Red Barn. And day 2 of the 5-day course was at the National Center for Therapeutic Riding. And we went there and we worked on horses. And usually, at the end of the day, you go out to dinner and everybody's chatting and it was kind of quiet at the dinner table there. And somebody finally said, is there any way we can go back there? Because I feel like I have unfinished business there. I feel like we peeled away some of these layers in those horses, but there's still a lot more. And Jim said, sure, he said, everybody was like thinking the same thing. They wanted to go back and do that. And that therapy horse is such a stoic warrior. They hold so much in and they do their jobs. And when you start to release some of that tension in them, you get this almost like, oh, finally, I get a chance to relax a little bit and be a horse. And these horses are getting great care, but it's just the nature of the work. And if you're doing some body work on a horse and then you see this client riding that horse in the arena with all the people around him in that therapeutic riding setting, and they tell you about the changes that are happening, it's just amazing. So Jim actually created a program that is dedicated to the therapy horse and introducing the bladder meridian to the people involved in the therapeutic horsemanship as a way to help the horse and help the rider. And that's been a beautiful program too. They call it the Masterson Method Equine Specialist. It's a whole separate training that Jim offers.
absolutely. Well, Will, I feel like we've kind of covered all of the bases I was intending to cover here. We've been going almost 3 hours, and I want to be respectful of your time. You said you kind of had a window here. Is there anything that we have not covered that you would like to make sure to get in here before we sign off?
Well, I think we've gone around the barn a number of times here on some really good conversations. These are the kind of conversations that could go on and on. But no, I think we've got a good sense of what I'm doing at Performance Equine Bodywork and working with horses and nutrition and people. I've been waiting for a gap in my schedule where I can get signed on to your BIT course, because that to me is such a huge part of performance, and we start to talk about how the jaw and the TMJ and all those aspects of it come into play. I'm really looking forward to that. So maybe next time we come around, we can talk about bits and body work together or something like that.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and as always, we will have links in the show notes to all of Will's stuff. So his Performance Equine Bodywork Facebook page and website, and his nutrition stuff and all of that. And since we did bring up Jim Masterson's dream of every horse experiencing the bladder meridian, I'm also going to put his YouTube video that shows you how to do that down in the notes, and it will not be a wasted 15 minutes. If you watch that video, go out to the barn and play with your horse. So if you can read horses at all, you're going to see a difference and a lot of relaxation coming out. And you may even see, this is one of the cool things, you start working on horse A and he starts yawning and releasing, and all of a sudden this other horse in the stall across the barn starts yawning. You got the whole barn ready to chill out and go to sleep, sing Kumbaya just by playing with one horse for a little bit, right? So, well, Will, we thank you for coming on the program. It's been an enjoyable conversation. We did cover some good ground here, I think, and I hope everybody enjoyed it as well. I'll leave you with the last word. And again, we'll have links to all the Will stuff where you can get in touch with him in the show notes.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. And, I guess if I had the last words to suggest to people is, less is more, folks. Just go out there and shift into that horse time and that horse sense of what's going on around you, and really enjoy that solitude that's available in there. Even in a busy barn, you can find it. But yeah, less is more, and your horse will thank you for it.
We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dauphin.